Chapter 1. Fallen Snow. Chapter Text. The first thing that he felt as he ebbed back into consciousness was his knees. Specifically, the thinly adrenaline-veiled sting of bloodied, abused ones. His palms felt like ice. Actually, everything around him felt like ice, an intruding contrast to the heat his head and legs were buzzing with. The world felt stilted as it came back into his perception. Sense bleeding into touch, bleeding into sound, bleeding into taste, bleeding into sight. His spine protested loudly at an attempt to raise himself off the impossibly cold ground. So instead he laid there, motionless. What happened? That was the first real thought to come to him, and with it came a sudden, lurching feeling of pain in his head and his ribs. His ribs? He had probably bruised them, but he wasn't sure when. He wasn't really sure what had happened at all. And now he's somewhere he can't identify on the concrete in some alley, probably, and no one knew where he was. A light snow was falling around him now. With these realizations, he began to notice the regained feeling in his legs and promptly forced his wailing body to sit upright, despite its aggressive refusal to cooperate. All right, inventory time. Both his knees were coated with crusted blood, not a surprise, but certainly unwelcome. His right leg was covered in soot and ash, meaning he probably ran through a fire at some point. God damn it. And he could feel a deep bruising on his cheek, pulsating along with the scrapes and scratches across his knees and arms. Pulling up his shirt revealed a deep, purple and blue bruise along the area of his stomach and ribs. Great. Peachy. Sitting up was difficult, but standing up was complete hell. His legs nearly buckled as he took a shuddering, treacherous breath. His vision swam for a second. God, whatever had hit his face must have hit hard. His shoulder collided with the wall, supporting his aching ribs momentarily as he made sure he wasn't dead on his feet. He stretched his digits up to his temple, rubbing monotonous circles into the tan skin there. Pulling his hands away, he noticed the fading cracks of gold along the paler side of his palms. Great. He had used his quirk, then. The soot that coated his legs and shoes was probably his doing, which eased something in his chest while sparking an entire other feeling of dread into life. He took out his phone. A passing glance at the clock told him it was past midnight, and opened the camera, wincing as his own complexion appeared. The bruise along his temple and cheek looked a lot worse than he had hoped it would, but that wasn't what really startled him. Both of his eyes were pulsating a deep, fiery gold, the same gold as the cracks that lined his skin. An after effect of his quirk, which was the nail in the now unavoidable coffin. God, okay, he had to think. What had happened? He couldn't remember anything that occurred before blanking out. Just a large chunk of time directly after school that was replaced with a vague, numbing darkness. It had to have been something. He never used his quirk to this point unless the circumstances were dire, and the last time something had called for it was, well, he really didn't want to think about that. Shaking his head, he checked the time just to make sure he hadn't gotten it wrong in his haste to look at his appearance. Sadly, he hadn't misread it. He shouldn't have been so surprised, considering the sky was pitch black. Along with the time, though, he noticed a large amount of unread notifications on his phone, all but 3 of them being from the same person. Damn it, he hissed through clenched teeth, and a shaky finger pressed its way onto one of the many messages sent from his mother. She was obviously panicking. The 7 missed calls said enough about that before he even read her frantic texts. Yesterday, 4:24 p.m. Mom. Izuka, honey, you should tell me if you're going to be home late from school. You know how worried I get. Yesterday, 5:12 p.m. Mom. Izuka, you're scaring me. Please message me, dear. Yesterday, 5:33 p.m. Mom. Baby, please talk to me. It's going to get dark soon, and I'm worried. Yesterday, 5:50 p.m. Mom. Izuka, baby, talk to me. If something's wrong, I'm here, okay? Yesterday, 5:51 p.m. Mom. Please pick up Izuku. Yesterday, 6:34 p.m. Mom. As soon as you get home, we're talking about this. Yesterday, 7:46 p.m. Mom. Oh God, Izuku, please be okay. Officer Sansa has been out looking for you for the past hour, and I'm so scared. Yesterday, 9:25 p.m. Mom. Please be safe, Izuku. Today, 1:17 a.m. You. Mom, I'm okay. I'm safe. I'm so sorry. Today, 1:17 a.m. You. I just woke up and I'm not sure where I am, but I'm safe, okay? I'm so sorry, Mom, oh my God. Today, 1:18 a.m. Mom. Oh, thank God you're okay, Izuku. Send me your location, I'm picking you up. He activated his GPS and sent a location pin to his mom, who sent a quick on my way in response. God, how could he do this to her again? He didn't deserve her, he really didn't. Some part of him wanted to sink into the growing piles of snow around him and disappear, no longer a burden, only drifting in the cold, icy fluff that seemed so welcoming despite his better knowledge. The other, less clouded part of his brain protested against this. Instead, he sent a small spark of warmth through his now numb fingertips, relishing in the heat, but scowling at the still glowing golden folds in his skin. He heard a car screech to a halt a few minutes later, which meant Mom had to have been driving around even before he had texted her. His location pin said he was a few miles from home, and she couldn't have traveled that far so quickly otherwise. The purring of the engine guided him to the front of the alley, and he felt tears burn their way from his eyes as his mom's round, worried face came into view. She didn't bother closing the car door, instead abandoning it in favor of leaping at her son. Tears stained both of their shirts as they sat there, crying in each other's arms for what felt like an eternity. The full force of what had happened slammed into him, and his already wrenched sobs became even more howl-like. He had used his quirk, his full quirk, and he was beaten up and scared and everything hurt. He spluttered and attempted to form words, but was shushed by a gentle hum that met his ears warmly. Mom was here. She was here, and he was safe, and he wasn't dead somewhere in an alley. Izuka, honey, it's okay now. Breathe. Deep breaths. Listen to me, okay? With that, he finally realized he had been on the verge of hyperventilation. Having a panic attack now wouldn't help anything. So he listened to her and felt her breathing ebb and flow from her warm, gentle chest. He was safe. He was safe. A hand made its way through his hair, untangling whatever curls it touched. I's a baby. You know we're gonna have to talk about this when we get home, right? She pulled back, examining his bruised face with a gentle look and an even gentler thumb on his cheek. I know, Mom. See, can it wait for later? I need to shower, and I'm exhausted. He pulled back further, wiping the dew still left in his glistening eyes, as his mother did the same. Of course, I'm taking you to the ER now anyways, dash. A faint scowl crossed his face at this, and she bit her lip subconsciously. Unless you would rather wait till the hospital opens at 5? Oh, Izuku, that's such a long wait. And your poor face. Another gentle swipe of a thumb across his jawline had her eyes shining with tears yet again, and he began stuttering for a way to fix that. Mom, I'm okay. I'm okay, really. I think the worst is probably just my knees, dash. That was far from the truth, considering the pain in his side continued to pulse beneath his shirt. And I could really use a shower, and you could really use some sleep, okay? You look, exhausted. The two were now making their way over to the small, homey Mitsubishi she had abandoned hastily. She cupped an acknowledging hand around her own cheek in embarrassment, pink-tinted fingers contrasting against the deep bags under her eyes. How long had she been crying? Actually, he wasn't sure he wanted to know. She hadn't mentioned his quirk yet, hadn't even flinched back when she had seen the pulsating gold orange of his eyes and hands. She'd expected this, then. Maybe that would make explaining everything easier. They got into the car and began driving, Izuku electing to hold his shaking mother's spare hand as he stared out the window. Izuku Midoriya's quirk made itself known at age 6, long after he had first thought he was quirkless. The early manifestations of his power emerged in the form of gentle flames licking his skin and the ability to draw a candle's embers towards himself. Sure, it was nothing special at the time, but he felt so proud of the quirk, his quirk, that he didn't care how simple it was on the surface. The teasing and bullying would continue for a long while even after his power appeared, though the blows from one Katsuki Bakugo were largely lessened thanks to Izuku's ability to snuff out the heat from his palms. This absolutely made him even angrier, but he could no longer supply Izuku's arms with more faint burn scars, so Izuku kept doing it. Izuku never liked making Kaken angry. He didn't like making anyone angry, but if it could keep him from coming home crying to his poor, overworked mother, he would do it time and time again. Izuku's perception of his quirk quickly changed after he turned 7, though, when his true abilities manifested, and he woke up surrounded by frightening, terrifying flames that filled his vision and burned his throat with smoke, and oh God, he couldn't breathe. That was in the past. Now, he doesn't like thinking about it. So Izuku Midoriya, age 7, locked away his monstrous power. Quirks gained strength with time, and the idea of being able to do any more damage than what he had already done horrified him. He trudged on, the load of his burdens remaining unknown to all but his mother. The taunts lessened as the years continued, all save for the ones thrown by Kakin and his collection of followers. He didn't think those fights would ever stop, but at this point, he also didn't think he was really worth defending, anyhow. Thanks to his quirk, Izuku discovered he was heat-resistant. He stopped trying to snuff out Kakin's explosions. Throughout all of this, despite the incident, despite Kakin's continued hatred of him, and despite the fact that he never wanted to use his quirk again, something deep, deep inside of Izuku screamed with passion at the thought of being a hero. Saving people mattered. It was something good he, despite his follies and mistakes, could still manage to do. All he needed to do was to become a hero without using his full quirk, which, according to virtually everyone he had crossed paths with during his short time of not having one, was supposed to be impossible. He would do it, though. He would have to. If he couldn't, then the only good part of him would die, and he just couldn't stand living like that. Izuku and Inko made a compromise. They would go home, take turns showering, eat a quick meal, and then drag themselves back down to the hospital at 5 a.m. As soon as the door was swung open, Izuku made his way to his room and face-planted onto his plush comforter. He really wanted to just fall asleep and forget about everything. But his bruised jaw burned its presence back into his mind at the pressure, and he stood up with a gentle sigh. He plugged his phone into the charger by his bedside, making sure the screen lit up before making his way to the bathroom. The torn, blood-stained shirt he wore was pulled off as gently as it could be, so as to avoid irritating his prone face even further. All of his muscles screamed in protest as he slowly undressed, but as soon as he was out of his constraining clothes, he moved towards the shower and turned it as hot as it would go. The heat would disinfect his cuts and scrapes, and though it would surely irritate the bruises marring his skin, he couldn't really care right now. A hot shower sounded goddamned amazing. After he was clean and his hair was dried as much as it would allow, Izuku redressed and sat on the edge of his bed. He grabbed his phone, the time flashing to life on the screen, reading out Tuesday, 2:16 a.m. in a bold font. He scrolled idly, avoiding the news apps staring at him from the corner of the screen, till he remembered the other notifications he hadn't had the time for earlier, and made his way to the group chat his friends had sent them from. He began making up a quick excuse for his absence, and assuring Kama and Kishi that he was just trying to sleep like a normal person for once in his life. Pink was berating the two others for interrupting his fake nap when Naga suddenly joined the conversation, just sending a row of question marks instead of any actual reply. He giggled as all of his friends jumped to explain what had happened and sent a quick, "Gonna go back to bed," while everyone was still typing. A gentle call of his name came from the kitchen, sapping his attention back to the real world. The house smelled of tea and stir-fry, and he smiled shakily at his mother, making his way behind her to settle his small, frail form onto the plush of hers. His mouth was pushed against the center of her back, arms wrapped around her waist, so when she asked a simple, "Would you mind setting the table, Izu?" he neglected to remember the muffled nature of his voice. Pulling back and moving towards the cabinet, he let out a small hum of approval instead, and made to place 2 bowls and the 2 steaming teacups on the table. "By the way, Honey Dash," Mom called to him as she began to take the rice and vegetables off the stove, "I called Officer Sansa back on my way to pick you up, and he says they'll need a statement from you down at the station tomorrow, if you're okay with that." She tacked on that last part, sending an understanding expression his way before taking the pot of rice and setting it on the table. She came back a moment later with the bowl of stir-fry and took a seat after she served herself. He carefully portioned his own meal before saying a quiet, "Itade kamasu," and digging in. They ate in a comfortable silence. Suddenly, though, Inko placed her chopsticks down beside her half-empty dish and looked to him with an obvious question on her lips. "Izuku, honey, it's been a long while since this happened, okay? I know that look Dash," he flinched at that. "And you shouldn't be beating yourself up over this." She paused, her mouth gaping open for a few moments afterwards, brow furrowed. A sigh escaped her lips, and she rested a hand under her chin. When she brought the other hand up to stroke the tops of his curls, he blushed under the care, but didn't say anything. Baby, can you tell me what happened? I know you're probably still confused, and I know it's probably not fun to think about, but please, Izuku, we just can't ignore this. She gestured vaguely in his direction, and he self-consciously toyed with the end of one of the bandages covering his arms. Mom, I know a sigh. I'm still piecing everything together, you know? I can't remember anything after school got out. It's just kind of fuzzy and blank. Though this obviously wasn't the first time this had happened, Izuku still got frustrated over the memory loss his Quirk provided. Just another perk of his stupid, useless power. Her hand halted its descent down his curls, instead finding its way under his chin and squeezing his dimples playfully. All right, honey, but as soon as you remember something, tell me please, okay? I don't want you to be alone when you figure out what happened, not this time. She planted a kiss on his forehead and shooed him off to the living room despite his insistence on helping with the dishes. Defeated, Izuku made his way to the couch and curled up there next to his phone, unplugging it from the charger and plopping down amongst a pile of blankets. Maybe watching TV would help get his mind off all of this. Flipping through the channels was nice and monotonous. Station after station of sports replays, children's cartoons, and cooking shows all melted together, until, suddenly, a word caught his attention and he flipped back a few channels. His grip went slack and the remote clattered to the floor. Izuku, what was that? Are you all right in there, dear? Inko slowly rounded the corner from the small kitchen, staring at her son, who was sitting with his hands still in the air. Mom, he stammered, shaky fingers lifting upwards to rest in a point. I think I know what happened. The news station flashed a series of clips, a small forest fire raging along the outskirts of Mizutofu, the charred remains of an alley, several pictures of melted spots of concrete, and, finally, an interview with a boy with golden blonde hair. Across the screen, in a large, bold font, were the words, "Villain attack and civilian rescue. Possible uncontrollable vigilante at work." Izuku paled at the words, but didn't move as the boy on screen began to speak. I thought I was dead. This big, really tall guy came at me with a knife. I think it was that one guy who was on the news yesterday? Hammerhead? I can't really remember. The boy looked exhausted. The bags under his eyes rivaled Izuku's. Actually, now that Izuku was paying attention, he noticed the boy was laying in a hospital bed. A strong hand gently held his shoulder in what seemed a reassuring manner. The boy continued. But, yeah, so that guy was there, and I was just on my way home from school, but he came at me and cornered me into the alley, and he had the knife, and he his breath caught for a moment, and the hand patted his shoulder gently. He was laughing about something, about how the world was cruel, and how he was just doing his job as a bringer of mayhem, or some shit, he hissed out, but with a glance off screen, a slight blush tinted his pallor face. Sorry, Mom. The boy went on, describing the man's appearance. He kept going, until the interviewer asked about the person who had saved him, and he paused. The person who saved me wished to remain unknown. I didn't catch a name or anything, but they were skinny and short, and their eyes were glowing. He paused, visibly struggling to find the words he wanted to speak, but slumping in defeat. The reporter gave him a gentle pat on the hand, and the camera footage faded back to a regular-looking newscast room. The two hosts talked politely, and Inko waited for their verdict on the news with bated breath. They briefly compared the current fires to the wildfires and burning of an entire city block several years back, until an image popped up on the screen of the murderer Hammerhead. Izuku let out something akin to a choking noise, grabbing her attention. Izuku's hand was finally wrenched from the air and was now shoved over his mouth. His eyes were blown wide, sweat seeping down his face. He made no move to speak. Honey, what's wrong? Talk to me, Izuku. He caught his breath in a violent wave and hunched over, lightly flinching when his mother's hands made their way to his back and face. I remember, Mom. I remember what happened last night. His shaking hands fell to his knees, clenching his legs with white knuckles. That's the guy I used my quirk on. And that boy was stabbed right in front of me. The news flickered off, and Izuku burst into tears. He saw red scorch the ground in puddles. Blood. A lot of blood. The boy across from him's eyes shot forward, gaze fluttering in time with his stilted breaths. The kid clutched his side and arm before falling to his knees, desperately scrambling backwards. The villain, leaning down to grab the boy by his collar, released a sickening howl of laughter. Izuku's bag slammed the concrete long before he knew what had happened. A small hand snaked its way around the much larger man's shoulder and locked in place there like a vice. The villain turned, smile never faltering, and raised the dagger towards the hand's owner. Izuku's face was tilted downwards, breath stuttering to a halt. "Hey kid, you just gonna stand there and die?" Izuku's face stayed in shadow until a faint glow appeared from somewhere beneath his nose. The man stiffened. Glowing eyes shot up to greet the villain's grim expression. Izuku bared his teeth at the man. Several sharp fixtures of bone formed into a grin, parted only when the glow gave way to a black, slick substance dripping from his lips. It landed on the concrete, and the man's shoes, with a deafening sizzle. "No dash," Izuku snarled, voice burning its way into the villain's ears. "But I guess you are." Fire burst forth all around them, and the villain rushed backwards, engulfed from knee to toe in crimson flame. The fire shone brightly off of the other boy's bright, golden hair, and his eyes shut against the scorching light. Fire bled from between Izuku's fingers, red and orange with choking heat, now the same color as the magma that dribbled from between his clenched teeth. His typically green-toned hair was iridescent against the cascading tower of flames. The boy on the ground shook painfully, but his eyes never left the silhouette of fire in front of him. The villain slammed back first into the wall as the flames grew higher, drowning the alley in yellow pillars of heat. Two screams rang out, one choked with stifling pain, the other masked by the thick magma from its owner's throat. The thing living beneath his skin burned. He burned back. He saw red. Chapter 2. Sadly, it's a sick day. Izuku fell asleep on top of his covers at 2:54 a.m. Sleep didn't come easily to him, especially when his quirk was added into the mix, but he tried his best to get whatever rest he could. Nightmares were frequent, but he tried to ignore them. Talking about it would just make things worse. A gentle hand on his shoulder woke him at around 5 a.m. Inko cooed gently, saying, "Time to get up, my sleepy boy. We've got to go to the hospital, remember?" He definitely did remember, but that didn't change the fact that he was running on under 3 hours of sleep. He rolled to face her, not bothering to stifle a yawn that came afterwards. "There's my handsome son. Now, get on something comfortable. We're going to head out in about 10 minutes. You can rest a bit on the way there, all right?" He hummed softly in response, sitting up and allowing his mother to plant a kiss on his cheek. Once she had made her way off the bed and out of the room, Izuku took his time getting up and slipping into a pair of sweatpants. Everything hurt, like, a lot. The pants brushed the bruise at the edge of his stomach, and he winced in pain. He could feel the bruising along his cheek and temple twofold. His knees weren't nearly as bad as they had been that morning, but they were still coated in deep gashes and road rash, so it wasn't really a plus. He took 3 ibuprofen tablets, swallowing down the last of a water bottle that was tucked under his bed, and slipped out his bedroom door. His mom was sitting on the couch, fully dressed in a warm winter coat and checking something on her phone before perking up at the sound of him approaching. They slipped on their shoes before making their way to the apartment parking lot. It was dead quiet, and the dark sky was filled with a light sprinkle of snow. Izuku drifted off into a restless sleep almost as soon as the car began to move. 20 minutes later, he woke with a start as his mom parked the car. The large, dull-colored sign of the hospital his mother worked at grabbed his attention immediately. There weren't very many cars there, which made sense, really, considering it was barely passing 5:30 a.m. Still, Izuku was glad for the inevitable quiet the hospital would provide, even if actually being there mostly made his skin crawl. Hospitals were definitely not on his list of top places to visit, but the pain in his side flared up with every minute movement, so he decided to bite the bullet. Hopefully he wouldn't need any sort of stitching in his knees, Last time he had gotten stitches was absolute hell. Izuku, baby, you awake? Inko quietly asked, dipping into his view slightly. She looked exhausted, and that snapped him awake enough to remember to actually get out of the car. Inside, the hospital was, thankfully, just as empty as he had predicted. There wasn't anyone in the waiting room currently, and the young woman behind the receptionist's desk greeted them with a bow of the head. She was rail-thin and had deep blue hair and eyes. He recognized her as Ms. Tsukiko Imoto, a medical student still struggling to pay off her debts. He smiled politely at her, and then glanced around the room while simultaneously toying with the end of one of his bandages. "Hello, Tsukiko-san. It's odd seeing you in so early. Did they take you off of night shift finally?" His mother prompted, already beginning to sign the paperwork for getting him into his appointment. "Good morning, Inko-san. Yup, I got moved to morning shift over the weekend. Today is my third day dash." She paused momentarily, sending a playful smirk Izuku's way. "I'm kinda glad, too, considering you're our first patient of the day. Hope you aren't causing your mother too much grief, Izukuin." His cheeks grew red, and he attempted to stammer out some sort of coherent response, until a tall, broad-shouldered woman at the end of the hall shouted his mother's name. "Midoriya-san. Good morning. Nice to see you all right after last night's fiasco." Dr. Aki was a kind but intimidating woman. She had jet black eyes, several sets of small, spiraling horns, and most of all, a large mane of untamed red hair. She waved kindly to Inko, calling her towards an examining room. Inko handed Imoto the paperwork, fully signed and completed, and the two made their way towards Dr. Aki's office. As soon as he sat down, the husky woman brought out a clipboard and stethoscope, gently placing the latter to Izuku's chest and back as she chatted idly with Inko. She had been his doctor and mom's co-worker ever since he was little, so they typically didn't bother with formalities. "All right, Midoriya-kun, what seems to be the problem?" She asked this while simultaneously checking his ears. "I mean, besides the obvious stuff, like the abrasions on your knees and arms, and the bruise on your face." He blushed shyly as she rolled her chair back, and he lifted his shirt slightly to reveal the deep purple of the bruise that blossomed there. Inko gaped at the mark, unaware until now of the severity of his injury. Aki snorted to stifle a giggle. "All right, not as bad as it could be, but still pretty bad. I'll get you some painkillers for your face and ribs, and you'll have to ice the latter for a few hours per day to help the pain subside. Bruised ribs aren't fun, kiddo. You've got to be more careful." He mumbled out in, "I know, Aki-san," and she giggled wholeheartedly this time, grinning widely at his embarrassed expression. "Well, besides the bruised ribs," Inko shot him an exasperated expression while saying this. "He's definitely overused his quirk. Sadly, he hasn't been able to sleep much since last night, so there's not much to say about that." She sighed and looked down to the floor. At Izuku's request, Inko had never fully disclosed the details of his quirk with her co-workers. In the end, they respected the Midoriya family's privacy, but that didn't stop a curious look from crossing Aki's face. "All right, there's not much else I can recommend besides rest and the ice pack. I'll get those painkillers for you on your way out, and we can redress the scuffs and scrapes, but promise to take it easy for at least a few days, all right?" She ruffled his hair at this, and the meeting came to a close. Inko picked up Izuku's prescription along with a copy of the visitation fee, and the two made their way out of the hospital. Inko sent one last troubled glance at his now re-wrapped injuries before starting the car and driving away. The day passed by quickly, Izuku resigning himself to the corner of his bed as he dipped in and out of sleep gracelessly. He awoke from flitting half-memories many times. Images of smoke and melted concrete burned into the back of his eyelids. No nightmares came yet, though. He was grateful it was daytime, when he could sleep peacefully and avoid whatever his head would decide to throw at him. His mother knocked lightly on his door, waking him from another bout of unconsciousness. She leaned down gently and pecked a kiss to his forehead, whispering, "I'll be back from work in the morning, Izuku. Get some rest, okay?" He mumbled a half-formed reply before snuggling beneath his blankets once again and drifting back into sleep. Flames dared to lick the sky around him, bleeding gold and red into the clear, starless black. He couldn't breathe or think. He just was. Something within him screamed, and a cry was wrenched from his lips, painting the still air with desperation. He suddenly realized that, despite the fact that he could not feel it, the fire was engulfing him. He strained his consciousness to stay, and tore his eyes from the ceiling of black to look down at himself. Where his hands should have been, two sets of black-tipped claws stared back. They weren't his, couldn't have been. He hadn't seen anything like them in years. He felt the already fading edges of his mind bristle. They were his, though. He flexed his muscles, and the tips of the hands moved in response, dagger-like nails barely raking across the flats of his palms. It sent a shiver down his spine. He could move now, though, which led to him turning, searching, for anything other than the endless plains of fire before him. Something along the ground caught his attention out of the corner of his eye, and he whipped around, face to face with a steaming, bubbling mass of something. The sudden stench of blood and flames scorched his senses, and the breath was snatched from his throat. There was something on his hands, now? Something red. Izuku woke up with a scream on his lips, splayed halfway between the floor and his bed, with his comforter thrown to the side. His neck creaked as the rest of his body slid downwards to meet him, and he held his knees tight against his chest. It was just a dream, just a nightmare. He was here, at home, safe. The words didn't help force back the acid clawing up his throat. He sat up, gently resting his aching head against the bottom half of his bed, breathing in and out slowly for a couple of long moments. It was dark outside, and a few stars peeked through his window, sending a blue-gray hue spiraling through the room. He focused on the twinkling fixtures, the breath in his chest steadying. Slowly, he got to his feet and made his way to the window, leaning onto the wall beside it, peeking out at the glass. It was a nice night. He didn't think he'd be able to sleep again, so he was especially grateful for the serenity. At least he could relax somewhat, even if he couldn't really rest. Maybe some tea would help get his mind off of this. The house was still, quiet night, air creeping indoors to paint the walls with deep blues. He crept through the living room, silent despite knowing he was the only one home, some part of him scared to shatter the peace. As he approached the kitchen, something bright pink caught his eye, and he turned towards the counter to see a small sticky note stuck atop a lidded bowl. "I'll be back at 5 a.m. Take your pain meds when you wake up, but not before midnight," was scrawled across it in his mother's bubbly, rushed handwriting. He flipped the note up to reveal another one underneath and picked the two up. This one read, P.S. I bought some of your favorite snacks. No eating the sweets until you've eaten some real food, though. Hope you have a great day, Han. Signed with a collection of little stars in the corner. He smiled and tucked the notes into his pocket, freeing up his hand to open the lid of the bowl. Inside were several rolls of Quaker Howlon strawberry cookies from IKEA. He'd love to shop there again sometime. A bag of Calbee shrimp chips, and a large Ziploc baggie filled with different flavors of Kit Kats. His smile grew wider, and he jumped to the fridge to look for something quick to eat. Mom was right. He should probably get some protein first. While he was rummaging through the fridge, Izuku spared a quick glance to check the time on the clock, 1:32 a.m. He figured taking his pain medication now would be best, considering it would take a while to kick in. Grabbing some leftover tonkatsu, he hurriedly closed the fridge. Looking at all the food made him excruciatingly aware of just how hungry he was. Once the food was properly heated up and his tea came to a boil on the stove, he grabbed his medication and then made his way to the table. The stars had shifted by now, and the light folding from the window nearest the dining area was beautiful. Once he had finished eating, he sat there for a moment, taking it in. He felt warm and comfortable now that he had eaten, and the tea he was still sipping had helped soothe his nerves further. He wished he could appreciate nights like this more often, even though he knew this was probably going to be the death of his sleep schedule. Whatever, he was flexible, he would work with it. Izuku made his way into the living room after that, picking out a roll of cookies and an old Studio Ghibli DVD before hastily shoving the disc into the player. The opening bars to Kiki's Delivery Service played, and he sunk into a pile of blankets snuggled in the corner of the couch. He stayed there, cozied up, teacup emptied, cookies in hand, and covered in blankets, and the gentle lull of sleep greeted him. He was unconscious by the time the final scene played, and his mother found him a few hours later on the way to her room. He looked peaceful. It was the best night's sleep he had gotten in a long while. Izuku stirred from sleep around 10 a.m., the smell of seafood and vegetables overwhelming his senses. Across the room, Inko was busying herself with a takoyaki pan, carefully portioning bits of batter and octopus into each hole. Once she was done, she turned around, cleaning her hands with a towel, and perked at the sight of Izuku shuffling towards the kitchen counter. "Good morning, Izuku. How's my sleepy boy doing?" A yawn forced itself out of him, and she giggled, setting down the towel and making her way over to him. "Fine, Mom. Thanks for making lunch. Sorry I wasn't up to help. I forgot to set an alarm," and he stopped, sighing. She simply brushed off the apology with a series of comments about him deserving to rest up and needing recovery time, and the worry in his gut settled quickly. They ate shortly after that, making small talk about the movie he watched last night and about her time at work all the while. Once they were finished, and Izuku was cleaning the dishes, which he refused to not help with, despite his mother's insistence, they settled into a calm silence. That is, until Inko sat herself onto a stool at the counter and sighed heavily. "What's wrong, Mom? Rough sleep?" he questioned softly, understanding coloring his tone. His mother worked so hard, and though she didn't suffer the same kind of insomnia he did, some days rest was difficult when stacked against her worries. She didn't say anything or even hum a response, though. The worry he felt earlier bubbled up again. "I know it's been a tough couple of days, but if you're up for it, honey dash," she paused and took a moment to undo the loose bun atop her head. "I really think we should speak to that new detective today." He blanched slightly at this. He had almost forgotten Officer Sansa and his interview. Some part of him wanted to refuse outright, but deep down, he knew she was right. "Sure, Mom. You're right. I think this is something I should get out of the way now, rather than later." The dishes were now stacked carefully in the strainer, and he dried off his hands, turning to her. She had stopped fidgeting with her bun in favor of looking at him with creased, caring eyes. "All right, honey. I'll go get dressed. Tell me whenever you're ready to head out, okay?" He nodded, and with that, she left. He was alone in the kitchen now. He stood there, silent. Suddenly, he moved forwards, steps and breath equally steady. He could do this. He could do this. It was just Officer Sansa. He could do this. He could not do this. The ride to the station was a short one, but it was plagued with a slowly growing feeling of dread. It had been, what, years since the last incident? And though they hadn't been completely out of touch, Izuku hadn't had a face-to-face conversation with the cat-headed officer since then. An interview was not the way he had wanted their reconnection to happen. But here he is, sitting in the waiting room of the office portion of the Mizudafu police station, minutes away from meeting the mysterious new detective who had replaced Abiko-san. Detective Abiko was the previous head of the Quirk Investigations Department, but now he was gone, and Izuku would be meeting with. "What's the new guy's name again, Mom? You said Sansa told you a bit about him, right?" He glanced at her sheepishly, hands wringing in his lap nervously. "Ah, it's okay, honey. His name is Detective Tsukachi, and he's apparently Abiko-san's cousin." With this, her hand made its way on top of his, steadying his shaking fists. "Sansa said he transferred in a year or so ago, and that he really trusts him. It's gonna be okay, okay? Deep breaths, baby." She kissed his cheek once more, and he steadied his breathing. Sansa walked in a few moments later and surveyed the room, before his eyes landed on them, and he hastily made his way over. "Naya, good morning, Midoriya-san, Midoriya-kun. Nice seeing you two again, dash." He bowed lowly and straightened the collar around his neck once he stood back up to his full height. "We can catch up a bit later. For now, please follow me, Naya." Despite knowing him for literal years, Izuku could never get used to the man's cat-like speech patterns. It was strangely endearing. They followed Sansa through a series of hallways. He only faltered momentarily to tip his head in acknowledgement at those who greeted the group. Izuku was getting increasingly nervous, the not quite familiar layout of the deeper areas of the building rousing his anxiety. They soon made their way to a large, metal door. A small sign was posted on the wall next to it, labeled Interrogation and Interview Room Number 3. A stone dropped in his stomach, and he watched, shakily, as Officer Sansa knocked politely on the door. A gentle come-in came from the other side, and he opened the door for Izuku. The boy stood there, shaking like a leaf, before gulping down one last breath of air and making his way into the room. The walls were plain, metal painted with white, pristine except for the chipping corners. One of the walls was parted with a strip of one-way mirror in the center. A single table was bolted into the floor in the center of the room, and one metallic chair with thin padding was placed on either side. The chair nearest the door was empty, and the opposite one held whom he assumed was Detective Tsukachi. The man was tall and slender, lean body framed by a crisp gray suit jacket that sharpened his shoulders. His shoes and hips were similarly boxy. The only parts of him that didn't appear sharp were his hair, which was slightly tousled, and his kind, supple face. He bowed his head in recognition, not putting down the folder he was reading, and Izuku forced his stiffening legs to move in the least robotic fashion he could muster. As he sat down, he could hear the gentle metal TCK of a door being closed. He remembered his mother would be watching from the other side of the mirror and relaxed marginally. He'd be okay, he could do this. "Hello, Midoriya-kun. It's nice to meet you." He set down the folder and closed it with a gentle smile. Izuku smiled back, though he knew it probably looked mangled and shaky. Tsukachi picked up a pad of paper and a thick, black pen. "Now, Midoriya-kun, I'm going to ask you a few questions about the events that took place between Monday, November 7th and Tuesday, November 8th. Feel free to not answer if a question makes you uncomfortable. This interview will be recorded and analyzed only by myself, Officer Sansa, and the 3 other investigators assigned to this case. Any questions?" Izuku shook his head no gently, and the detective clicked his pen, flipping to a specific page in the notebook and placing the tip there. "Midoriya-kun, where were you at 3:30 p.m. on November 7th? His mind froze, and he fidgeted with the end of one of the remaining bandages on his arms. "I was at school, and I started walking home around 3:40-ish. He tacked on that last part, his memory still a bit too foggy to make a coherent timeline of events. Tsukachi scribbled something down in the notebook and then looked up at him again. "What route did you take in order to get home?" Izuku paused at this, trying to remember the specific streets he had crossed. After detailing what avenues he had taken, Tsukachi hummed in response and finished writing down the directions. "Were you involved in the attack by the villain Hammerhead, which took place approximately around the same time you were walking home?" There it is, he thought. He tried to mask his fear, taking a few moments before stammering out a response. "I was present during the conflict, but I didn't know it was Hammerhead at the time. My memory is kind of foggy, so I can't really remember much." Tsukachi quit writing about halfway through his statement, and Izuku, realizing this, stopped lamely. His eyes darted between his hands and the detective in front of him. "I see," the man said, voice calm. "I was previously informed about the memory loss related to your quirk." Izuku fidgeted restlessly. Tsukachi hummed, jotting down something in the notebook. "So, Midoriya-kun, did you try to intervene in the conflict using your quirk?" "Why, yes, sir. I used my quirk when I saw the villain was trying to harm someone." "Your quirk is called Hellfire, correct?" Izuku physically flinched. "Yes, sir." "Do you know what caused the damage to the surrounding buildings and concrete located at the scene of the conflict?" Izuku tried to swallow the lump in his throat. "No, sir. I can't really remember anything after I approached the villain." Tsukachi hummed again and paused to finish writing something across a new page in his notebook. Izuku waited anxiously. "Midoriya-kun, do you remember the events leading up to your recovery in the alley located on the outskirts of Mizudafu?" "No, sir. I don't remember anything other than waking up." "I see. Can you tell me the extent of the injuries you received during this period?" At this, Izuku self-consciously stopped fiddling with the bandages on his arms and sat straighter in his seat. "Both of my knees are, covered in abrasions. I have several scrapes and cuts along my arms, too. And, several of my ribs were bruised, along with my face." His hands tightened around bunches of his pants, stilling themselves in the fabric. Tsukachi hummed once more, though his pen didn't still for several long moments. "All right, Midoriya-kun, that's all the questions I have for you today." He smiled politely, and Izuku physically sagged in relief. The two made their way to the door, and Inko greeted Izuku once they exited, enveloping him in her plush arms. Naya, thank you for your time, Midoriya-san, Midoriya-kun. We'll update you regarding the case soon, okay? Inko smiled softly, and the mother and son bowed, hands linked. Another officer offered to escort them to the front of the building, so they made their way out, leaving Officer Sansa and the detective in front of the interrogation room. You're being awfully quiet, detective. Sansa was leaning against the wall nearest the interrogation room door, surveying Naomasa with a flick of his ears. Tsukachi merely flipped through the notebook in his hands, turning back to the final page he had written on during the interview. The answers he had received from Midoriya were written in his own neat, tidy handwriting. Sansa turned his head, making a subtle glance over Naomasa's shoulder. He somberly looked at each answer, before taking out his pen and circling three of them which had been marked in bold, underlined text as lies. I don't know what he's lying about, or if he even meant to, but that kid is hiding something, Sansa. The cat-headed officer's ears flattened against his fur in confusion. And I fully intend on finding out why. Chapter 3. That's why. Today was Thursday, and Izuku's first day back at school since the recent accident. He trudged along the path towards the school building, head low and eyes trained on the ground in front of him, carefully avoiding the small piles of snow present along the sidewalk. He was not excited to make up 2 whole days' worth of work, but beggars can't be choosers. Suddenly, his phone vibrated, and he pulled it out of his pocket. The picture of him and Kishi-san that was set as his lock screen made a smile cross his face, before he read over the notification from the group chat and hastily made his way to the server. Pink had apparently tagged him in something, and considering her school started an hour earlier than his, he wondered what could be so important. He subconsciously navigated around the dwindling students in the courtyard. He still had 5 minutes till classes started. He could take a moment to sit and talk. The server loaded and he stared at his phone, expression blank, before bursting out into a fit of giggles. God, he hoped no one was looking his way. On the screen in front of him was a large, cinematic image of Pink. Her small, spiraling horns framed the frizzy hair that was encircling her cheeks. And, in the background, what appeared to be Kishi mid-fall out of a tree. He was incredibly blurred, but Izuku could tell he was dabbing. Today, 8:24 a.m. Acid Queen. Good morning, fuckers, let's get that bread. Today, 8:25 a.m. Might Light. OH my AFCAB Bajba, is Kishi okay? Also, why was he in a tree? Today, 8:25 a.m. Acid Queen. HES fine LOL, he used his quirk DW. Izuku sighed deeply and smiled fondly at the screen, until Kishi's username popped up with an is typing message in the corner of the screen. Today, 8:26 a.m. Soft Boy. Yo dudes, what's up? That was awesome. I almost died abfabk. Izuku snickered again, until the warning bell cut through his thoughts and sent him flinching. He typed out a quick, 3 you guys talk to you after school, before pocketing his phone and jogging towards the front doors of the building. Ducking between the crowded corridor to get as close to the wall as possible, Izuku quickly made his way to class. His bag was hastily tossed onto the chair in front of him, and he began to organize his notebooks and pens before gently sitting down, leg already twitching with nervous energy. Hopefully today would be. Move out of the way, fucking extras. Izuku flinched aggressively, knee jumping so high it almost hit the underside of the desk. Oh well, wishing was worth a shot, anyhow. Bakugo thankfully quieted down after that, electing to scowl at the student behind him who had somehow managed to scuff his shoe. The teacher entered, and everyone filed into their seats at a slightly quicker pace. He hoped today would be a simple class, or perhaps something interesting, which could distract from the mountain of anxiety now building in his gut. He wasn't really sure which would be better. Good morning, class, Bakugo-kun, please quiet down. You and Cheige can discuss your shoe problem later. For now, class is starting. The aforementioned girl blushed, and her quirk sent the smell of tea leaves wafting through the air. Kakin simply grumbled out something that was probably meant to be hostile, but the teacher elected to ignore it. Class went on as normal. Kakin sending snide looks Izuku's way any time the boy began to rap lightly on the desk with his pencil, and the students around him quietly dozing off, taking poorly organized notes, or some unholy combination of the two. As they approached the last 10 minutes of class, their teacher finished his Japanese lecture before pulling a thick stack of papers from behind the podium he was standing in front of. Now, class, it's time for you all to start thinking about your futures. Don't give me that look. Ikari, I saw you sleeping. And no quirk usage in class. You kids have to take this seriously. He leveled a glare at the students before slamming the stack down and watching as some of them finally shot awake. Ikari in particular startled before the spikes that had been bristling on his head smoothed down. It's time for you kids to think about what you want to do dash. Izuku's attention was caught by the unfinished note that lay on the paper in front of him, and he quickly jumped to fill in the final line. His teacher's words bled into the background momentarily. But I know you all want to go on the hero track. The room suddenly exploded with Quirk's left and right, and the lead of Izuku's pencil snapped clean in half. He wiped off the mess, doing his best to not let his anxiety cloud his face. Hopefully no one would manage to. Listen, teach, don't lump me in with these fuckers. I'm on a whole nother level. They'll be lucky to end up as sidekicks. Bakugu's feet were on his desk, and his glistening palms made their way behind his spiky blonde hair. The room rang out with protests and boos, but Kakin just continued to smirk wildly. Suddenly, he flipped himself up onto his desk, pointing aggressively at his chest. I've got the test scores to get into UA, and I'm gonna fucking do it dash. Someone shouted something profane at the boy, and he twisted around quickly, shouting, fucking fight me if you've got a problem, asshole. Bakugu, watch your temper, please, the teacher drawled, before flipping through the set of papers for a moment. He came across a random sheet, and his eyes widened. Say, Midoriya, you're trying to get into UA too, correct? Izuku had sunken low into his seat by now, arms folded protectively in front of himself, but he still jolted at the mention of his school of choice. He mentally started counting to keep his breathing in line. The room around him exploded once more, several giggles, and an exclamation of Midoriya? Seriously? Followed by an actual explosion right by his face. Bakugu was in his personal bubble now, smoking hands charring the desk in front of him and filling the air with embers. He breathed heavily through his nose, and Izuku's chair shot backwards, nearly depositing him on the floor. The smell and heat coming off Kakin's palms made his throat close up and his mind spiral. The thing beneath his skin itched, pleading to snatch the fire directly out of Bakugu's palms and use it for itself. Images of scorching walls and ash flashed through his mind at the sensation. He couldn't do it, not today, maybe not ever. DKU, you piece of shit. You think you can beat me with that weak-ass quirk of yours, huh? Kakin was now literally fuming, hands clenching and unclenching into fists at his sides. Izuku shrank further in on himself, wishing he could just disappear. And no, Kakin, that's not what I meant by dash. He was swiftly interrupted by another explosion near his head, Kakin's hands slamming the wall behind him, singing a few of his curls in the process. Fucking Deku, you better stay the hell away from dash. The bell suddenly rang, and a collective sigh could be heard from both some of his classmates and his teacher. Izuku slumped against the chair, breath unsteady and limbs full of static. Bakugu tisked loudly, before kicking at Izuku's feet and picking up his bag, slamming another explosion onto Izuku's desk before stalking out into the hallway. Izuku could barely breathe again, mouth filmy dry and ears ringing slightly. He could do this. He could get through today. He slowly got up, relief washing over him at the sight of his hero notebook having been knocked onto the floor rather than caught in the blast. Him and Kakin only had one other period together. He could make this work. Quickly shoving the neat notebook and pens into his bag, Izuku scurried out of the classroom. The final bell rang, and Izuku hurriedly closed out the article he had been reading. Apparently, a new hero named Mount Lady had debuted yesterday morning. He'd have to do more research before shoving his phone into the pocket of his pants. If he hurried, he could. Deku, where were you yesterday, you fucking bastard? Bakuga growled, and Izuku could already smell the smoke coming off of his hands. It was their second term, But Izuku still could hardly handle having Kaken in class at the very end of the day. Seeing him during homeroom was really hard enough as is. I was a think idiot. Izuku couldn't tell him the truth, could he? I got caught in a villain attack yesterday, the same one that caused all those fires. Not technically a lie, right? Kaken's face didn't betray how he was feeling, much to Izuku's dismay. He swallowed around the lump crowding his throat and took a gentle step backwards. Kaken narrowed his eyes, shoved his steaming fists into the pockets of his pants, and grimaced. Okay, he probably thinks I'm lying. Shit. Fucking idiot. Can't even defend yourself with that lame-ass quirk, huh? He took a monstrous step forwards, cornering Izuku into the nearby wall. You're pathetic, don't fucking forget that. You'll never make it into UA dash at this. He took one last commanding step towards Izuku and gently placed his scorching hand on the cowering boy's shoulder in faux placation. Got it. G dash, he tried desperately not to choke on his own fear. Got it. The two other boys, presumably Kaken's friends, even though he probably wouldn't consider them that way, snickered and waited calmly for Bakugo to take his still-smoking hand away from Izuku's, now crumbling, uniform. They retreated behind him and stopped in the doorway when he did the same. You know, Deku, if you're really that fucking pathetic, there is a way to get you a better quirk dash. Izuku flinched. Please don't say it. Please don't say it. Please don't say. You could always take a dive off the roof and pray to the gods that you get a chance in your next life. The last of Izuku's hopes snapped into little, brittle pieces. Sluggish tears were making their way down his face. He's not sure when that had started. One of the other two boys, he had golden, glowing threads wrapped around his neck. Izuku is pretty sure his name is Aiko Ito. Stands there, smiling, though it doesn't feel genuine. Damn, Midoriya, IDV thought you might actually hold your ground this time. Dash, he uttered, smile breaking. He gently rubbed at his own shoulder, before retreating behind Bakugo's other accomplice. Izuku stood in the deserted classroom. He was finally by himself, but he didn't feel safer, just more alone. He decided to take the long way back home. The route being tucked further away from where the other students would be traveling definitely helped clear his head. It also made it easier to avoid Kaken, so he tried not to think about it, instead pulling out his phone in favor of finishing the article about that upstart hero. Her quirk was apparently some form of gigantification, which would probably explain all of the reported property damage at her debut yesterday. He thumbed through a few other reports, carefully absorbing all of the available information, until he looked up and startled at how dark his surroundings were. He whipped his head around in several directions until the realization hit him. Oh, just under the tunnel. God, I'm stupid. It's been overcast because of all the smoke. I shouldn't have gotten spooked. He sighed deeply and elected to tuck his phone back into his pocket. He'd really rather not get lost. And imagine how rude it'd be if he accidentally ran into someone. Just because I feel bad doesn't mean I get to. His thought process was shattered by a too-close-for-comfort clattering of metal. He whipped around once more, but this time he was face to face with a giant, looming mass of what appeared to be living sewer sludge. Hey kid, so glad I could meet you, but I ain't got time for talking dash. Izuku's body was violently slammed to the concrete, stars briefly clouding his vision before the black faded. The sewage, villain, definitely a villain, was weighing down on his legs and torso, heavy liquid keeping his limbs firmly locked in place. Izuku struggled and struggled against the weight, trying to slam his static-filled arms into whatever was closest. None of the hits landed impactfully, all of them being absorbed into the porous goo of the villain's body. He could feel his quirk heating his body up, and couldn't tell if the tears in his eyes were due to that terribly familiar sensation or the fact that he was probably about to be murdered. Thanks for this, kid. You're really my hero. The villain smiled far too widely, yellowed teeth on full display, before slamming an arm-like section of liquid into Izuku's face. Izuku couldn't breathe. The goop forced its way down his throat, and a sob was stifled there. The villain said something else, but Izuku couldn't hear him over the thoughts burning their way through his mind. He was going to die here, wasn't he? He was too weak, too useless. The crescendo of heat buried in his limbs threatened to burst forth, but Izuku couldn't bring himself to let it escape. He could hardly see any more, still choking for another breath of air, for something to keep himself alive besides the wretched flames beneath his skin. Please, no, I can't. There was suddenly a thunderous crash somewhere near him, his disorientation keeping the exact direction unknown. Following the crash, he felt a rush of force, and the villain in front of him was thrown apart. Izuku's limp body skidded a few paces backwards in the collision. Just before his vision completely left him, Izuku saw a tall, muscular figure. They were smiling. Izuku awoke some time later to a light rapping noise that he managed to mentally connect to whatever the hell was smacking his face. He shot up in fear of an oncoming attack, but wilted when he realized he could actually breathe. He took a moment to take deep, gulping breaths before turning to look at what, or who, had been hitting him. He nearly fainted all over again when All Might, the All Might, was kneeling lowly in front of the boy. Izuku let out a shrill yelp, gaped, and then shot to his feet when All Might, oh my god, it's really All Might, started standing as well, looking Izuku over carefully. Good to see you're all right. Sorry to scare you like that, Dash. All Might put up his hands placatingly. I just wanted to make sure you weren't hurt. Good job being so tough, kid. With that, the man held up 2 bottles filled with what appeared to be the sludge villain. And I caught the villain. Izuku couldn't say anything. He couldn't think of anything to say, really. The #1 hero, right in front of him. He awkwardly wringed his hands, trying to withhold the urge to ask for an autograph. I don't want to be even more of a bother. Izuku descended into a quick series of bows, his hair flying from his face in all directions. Thank you so much, All Might. I'm sorry you had to save me. He finally paused, still extended in a bow, and felt tears bead in the corners of his eyes. All Might thankfully didn't appear to notice, instead gesturing with a large thumbs up. No need, kid. It's what I'm here for. Stay out of trouble, okay? And Dash, he picked a piece of paper out of one of the pockets that wasn't now housing the sludge villain's capsules. Here's an autograph. Izuku's breath caught in his throat once more, and he shakily reached for the paper. Oh God, please tell me I'm not dreaming. The paper was thick, folded cinnaways, and was scribbled with All Might's iconic signature. It was officially one of Izuku's most prized possessions. He tucked it gently into the pocket of his backpack, which had been carefully laid out beside where he had woken up on the concrete. When he turned back around, All Might was gingerly stretching his legs, crouched low to the ground. All Might, before you leave. Sorry, kid, but I'm very busy, Dash. Izuku mustered all his courage and, despite the way interrupting his idol made his stomach sink to his feet, called in as loud a voice as he dared. Can I be a hero without using a quirk? All Might legitimately paused at this and didn't turn around for several long, lingering moments. When he spoke, it was in a whisper. Without a quirk? He finally turned to face him, and Izuku sucked in a breath through his teeth at the serious look on the man's face. I'm sorry, but without a quirk, hero work would be suicide. At this, the man took a step towards him. Izuku had to fight the urge to step back. All Might avoided Izuku's gaze, saying, if you don't have a quirk, something like police work would be better suited for you. It's okay to dream, but Dash, he stopped lamely, standing rigid before turning back around and descending into a squat. Sorry to be the one to break this to you, and sorry I can't talk more, but good luck, okay, kid? He put up a cautionate hand, inhaled deeply, and then took off in a gust of wind. Over the void of endless noise in Izuku's head, he could swear he heard the distant sound of coughing. Everything felt muddied and not really real. Izuku knew it was real, knew he was real, but that didn't stop everything from being off. His vision was far too narrow, and his hands buzzed with a strange sensation. This was different than the feeling he got when his quirk tried to burst forth, but Izuku could never tell whether or not it was worse. Head swimming, and All Might's words echoing through his skull, Izuku stumbled down the sidewalk the best that his numbed legs would take him. He tried to focus on his breathing again. In for 4, hold for 3, out for 4, in for 4, hold for 3, out, until he felt the pulsating of his heart quiet measurably. It didn't stop the shaking in his palms, though. From what he could feel of his face, he was frowning. His phone rumbled in his pocket. He ignored it. The ground beneath Izuku's feet rattled even more violently, though he barely registered it at first, but finally shook his head and dragged his gaze upwards. What could have? His still stuttering thoughts came to a screeching halt as the edges of a large, exploding fire peeked from between two buildings. What the actual hell? Izuku suddenly realized he was moving, feet rushing towards the danger and hands clutching the straps of his backpack for dear life. His body was moving despite the suffocating feeling in his chest. He shouldn't bother stopping. It's not like he could make a difference, right? His stupid damn quirk would just make it worse. As his feet slowed and he found himself in the back of the crowd, Izuku squinted against the scorching light, searching for a place to see above the crowd and through to the chaos. The alleyway was crowded with civilians and heroes alike, but whatever they were fighting was too far into the flames for him to see. What the heck could have caused this much fire? The familiar smell of smoke and crumbling would made his head spin, but he kept moving. Izuku had been safely away from the scene, and he knew deep down that the only fire-related incidents in recent years had been caused by. Everything stopped once more, this time even more violently. The muddled world around him snapped back into view with a hammer-like gentleness, and the dulled-down sounds of flames and screams came soaring back to full volume, too. As soon as he'd gotten a good view of the carnage, he saw him. Kaken. Izuku registered his feet shooting forwards, hands straining to curl into fists as his will alone commanded the flames around him to dissipate. He felt the stinging of heat in his palms and choked down a whimper. I can't. I shouldn't use it, but... The flames withered into themselves, flickering considerably less wildly. The screaming in his veins grew louder, and he threw open his palms in order to counteract his quirk's urge to burn. He could hear shouting behind him, but his busy mind elected to ignore it. One last step led him clambering into the body of the sludge villain. Oh God, he must have escaped when I distracted All Might. And he thrust his still steaming palms into their amorphous body. The sludge gave way to the intensity of his heat, and he met Kaken's hand in mere seconds. Turning to face Izuku full-on, Bakugo spat out a chunk of goop and grimaced angrily at the boy. What the fuck are you doing here, Deku? There was still a considerable amount of bite to his tone despite the strain in his voice. Kaken. There were tears staining Izuku's face, and he could feel the heat rise in his blood once more. I couldn't just stand there and watch you die. Suddenly, a large hand clamped itself onto Izuku's, and he turned around to see the hero Death Arms gritting his teeth. Hold on tight, kid, dash. And with that, a series of tree limbs exploded from behind them, impacting the villain and, due to the sheer number of branches, forcing the upper half of the slime apart. Death Arms yanked forwards, pulling Izuku's arm with his, and subsequently wrenching Bakugo from the villain's grasp. The villain let out a scream of rage and sloshed forwards menacingly, until a concentrated, rocketing force of air splattered him along the back of the alley. Izuku could hear shouts of joy behind him, but the smell of the villain and the fire around him kept his head from turning around. The hand that had been clasping Kaken's was red with strain, and there were definitely nail marks bitten into the palm. He wheezed deeply, waiting for the vertigo to dissipate. One last less shuddering breath proved that he wouldn't vomit at the first sign of movement, so he raised himself up slightly. The lean build of a hero met him mid-rise, and Izuku held their hand for dear life. Now turned around, Izuku was met fully with what had wrenched screams of joy from the crowd. All Might was here again, and Izuku's knees shook, more than just adrenaline forcing him to remind himself to just breathe. All Might left seemingly as quickly as he had come, brushing aside reporters and civilians the same in favor of rocketing into the sky with a signature smile. Izuku felt something shake his body and turned to realize that, oh, the hero who helped me up is asking if I'm okay. He can't muster up enough energy to give much more than a tiny nod. Something of a grimace crossed the woman's face. He didn't recognize her, which is saying something, really, considering his research habits. She wasn't too plain, either. Pink hair cropped in a bob, claw-like hands tipped with rough purple hide, which spiked his curiosity further. He suddenly recognized the fact that she was leading him towards the back of an ambulance, and he did his best to cooperate. A blanket was snuggled around his shoulders, and he soon found a water bottle had somehow appeared in his palm. The woman kneeled low to him, offering out a clawed hand, which he blinked dumbly at for a few seconds, before grabbing it and squeezing the rigid digits. Slowly, his senses came back to him. His hands and throat were steaming and burning beneath the skin. He could finally feel the cold radiating off of the woman's palm, and had a surge of nausea hit his stomach despite that. Everything started to make slightly more sense, but it also seemed to be even more confusing, too. He could have died. Kakin could have died, too. All things considered, he felt surprisingly calm now that he could actually feel again. The woman grinned kindly when he looked at her. "There you are, kid. Thought I lost you there. Deep breaths, and try some of that water, okay? Works more than you might think." With this, he shakily unscrewed the cap of the water bottle, and she asked if it was okay for her to touch him. He nodded. Something to keep him grounded would be nice about now, and she gently swirled circles into his back with the palm of her hand. Nerves settled and mind at a dull but coping pace, Izuku murmured a quiet, "Titch, thank you. Sorry to be such trouble." What he wasn't expecting, though, was for the woman to snort and let out a low chortle. "Kid, it might just be the shock or something, but what the hell are you talking about?" She was grinning even wider, other hand running through her matted bangs. "You've got guts, little hero. Don't go around thinking you're a burden or anything like that. You kicked some serious ass." Izuku couldn't tell what his face looked like, but he guessed it must have been pretty funny, considering the woman doubled over and let out another low rumble of laughter at the sight. "Come on, don't gimme that look. Look, little hero, you did good, all right? And don't say otherwise. You handled a villain that the pros couldn't even get a grip on. All fucking might had to step in to make a difference, so don't think what you did was dumb, all right? I mean dash." At this, she wiped her eyes to clear some leftover tears from her laughing bot. "Don't go running into danger unsupervised like that again. Why here? Kids are worth more alive than dead, and you're one hell of a kid." Izuku could feel tears bead in the corners of his eyes, and smiled brokenly before clearing them away. She gently ruffled his hair, and then made to stand up, stretching her muscular shoulders. "Now, I've got to go help with the damage cleanup. Stick around till the police give you the good to go, all right?" When he nodded, she grinned widely and began to walk forwards. "Wait." Izuku squeaked out, voice cracking at the end from strain. A quirked brow from the woman met his outburst, and he felt his face redden. I'm sorry, but, what's your name? I haven't seen any news about you before." Realization hit her expression, and she smiled kindly. "I'm an intern, kid. Straight from Shiketsu. I'm in my last year, though dash." She quickly pulled out a business card and handed it to him. The bright white against purple-gray made him quirk a smile. "So keep a watch out for the light-bending hero, Dakakari." She proudly pumped a thumb towards her chest, and then turned and sprinted to a crew of nearby police officers. Izuku couldn't help the warmth in his cheeks. "She called me a hero, but..." His smile cracked, and he stared down at the business card. In the corner, a claw-like hand framed the outside of the word Dakakari. "If a hero like her believed in me, maybe I'm not a lost cause." The tears staining his cheeks came back twofold before he forced them down again. A kind-looking police officer came over and had him give a statement, and after the exchange of info, he was allowed to go. Heart heavy with unanswered questions, and the business card safely towed in his pocket, Izuku set off for home. It was to Izuku's utmost surprise, though, that only 2 minutes into his walk someone stepped into his path. It wasn't just someone, though. All Might's giant foot hit the concrete. He stood in front of Izuku in all his panic-inducing glory. He smiled brightly, and Izuku squinted against the sun framing his back to the sky. All Might's signature smile was different. Midoriya dash. "Oh my god, why does All Might know my name? I saw your actions earlier, my boy. You jumped in to save that young man when no one else, when no other hero would. I almost didn't make it in time myself." All Might's figure moved forwards, further blotting out the sun behind him. Izuku resisted the urge to pass out on the spot. "And that is why, my boy." He paused. and Izuku swore he could feel how genuine his expression was. That is why I think you'd be an excellent hero. Not for the first time that day, Izuku wept. Chapter 4. You can get better. Izuku was still crying when All Might took a knee in front of him. He had a nervous tilt to his smile, though it still somehow felt genuine. Hey, kid, what's with all the waterworks, huh? He chuckled and placed a hand on Izuku's shoulder. The fire beneath the boy's skin squirmed, and he struggled to get his breathing under control. Sorry, All Might. He breathed deeply and cleared away the remaining tears from his eyes. When Izuku looked up at the legend in front of him, the man let out another chuckle. That's quite all right, Midoriya. Now, I've got to get going. But listen here, young man. His idol straightened up and stifled a cough into his hand. Izuku stood at attention, flinching at the booming voice. Like I said, you've got what it takes to be a hero. I truly was mistaken earlier, and for that I apologize. So, I want you to do something, all right? Though the man's face hardly changed, his next words made his smile seem much less happy and more challenging. Apply to UA, learn what it's really like to be a pro, and grow from there. I'll be watching. Though All Might was smiling, the glint to his eyes set Izuku's nerves on the fritz. He attempted to smother the flames in his veins once more. "Gee, got it, sir." His broken smile was met with All Might's now turned to him back, and he squoze his hands into fists at his sides. His throat was too tight. "One more thing, before I have to go dash," All Might started, voice so serious it sent shivers down Izuku's spine. "That quirk you have is yours, and yours alone. Please, train it, and yourself, and become the hero you strive to be." Izuku's smile broke into a surprised expression. Oh God, he must have seen me use it, so why does he dash? "See you around, kid. Stay out of trouble, all right?" And with a push of his legs, All Might was off. Yagi breathed deeply, choking around the blood clogging his esophagus. Damn it, I really pushed it this time, didn't I? He coughed loudly, leaning against the railing of the rooftop he had hastily landed on. It was worth it, though. He would bleed himself dry if it was the only way to do what he had just done. Thankfully, it hadn't come to that. Izuku Midoriya, thankfully, the police had been more than kind enough to share the kid's name with him, was seemingly an intelligent, strong, and caring boy. And Yagi had almost crushed his dreams. He wasn't nearly as intelligent as some other pros. He was the first to admit that his brute strength had lessened his need for strategy sometime along his hero career, but that didn't mean he was an idiot. Yagi saw the look on that boy's face. It had stricken him at first, really. But it was true, what he had said. Yagi knew that a quirk was needed to defeat most villains, better than any other hero, considering where he came from. And, well, he really wasn't the best with words, so. Midoriya did have a quirk, though. The strong, intelligent, quiet boy who was nearly strangled to death by a villain hours earlier had a quirk, and he only used it when someone else was in danger. Yagi shuddered, remembering the lifeless face of the boy as he gently placed him on his side, patting Midoriya's back as forcefully as he could handle. He remembered the way he retched and coughed up the slime, too. Yagi gagged on his own blood. But he was alive, and he was strong, and he wanted to be a hero. That boy, who nearly threw away his life so as to not use his dangerous quirk on another person, wanted to be a hero. Maybe this wasn't a good idea after all. Yagi hoped that was just the pessimist in him talking, because after everything was said and done, he knew Izuku Midoriya could be an amazing hero. And he hoped the boy could be his successor, too. Izuku's bag crashed to the floor as soon as he walked in the door. With it, he heard his mother gasp. "Izuku? Is that you, honey?" She came around the corner, and Izuku could see that her eyes were wet and red. She tackled him as soon as he was within reach, and his eyes spilled over as well. "Izuku, baby, I was so dash," her voice cracked aggressively, and she choked on a sob. "I was so worried. Are you okay?" She held his tear-stained cheeks gently in her hands, and he nodded shakily, trying to suppress the snot and tears dripping down his face. Mom, I'm all right, all right? I'm here. I'm dash." His voice broke, throat tight from built-up panic, and he openly sobbed into her soft, caring arms. She led him to the living room like that, and only parting from his side when he had trouble catching his breath. Izuku, honey, breathe with me, okay? It's okay now. The tears in her voice were now much more passive, and when she took several deep, even breaths, he mimicked her. They sat there for several long, deliberate moments. When his lungs were finally steadied, he hunched over his own legs, placing his elbows on his knees. When the police called, I was so worried, baby. Sometimes, she paused and gently placed a hand over one of his own. Sometimes you're just too brave for your own good, Izuku. His breath caught once more, and the self-loathing he managed to bury earlier with the help of All Might's support rushed to the surface. God, I'm so fucking stupid, oh. Mom doesn't know about All Might. Though his tears had redoubled, his breathing remained steady. Slowly, he inhaled deeply and then sighed. And Mom, I met a dash, he fidgeted with a rip in his jeans. I met All Might today. During the incident, Mom inhaled audibly, though the hand over his own didn't move. I asked him if I could be a hero without using my quirk. God, you're pathetic. Can't even be a real hero. And he said, and no. Inko only moved to place her other hand on his shoulder. She tried to look him in the eye, but he purposefully avoided her gaze. Seeing her now just might put him over the edge. He breathed deeply once more. And then Kaken was in trouble from that V-villain. And his breaths were picking up again. I couldn't just not do anything. I saw his eyes, Mom. He was so scared. I was scared. So I jumped in and tried to save him. And I helped, Mom. The heroes could only get to him because I used my quirk. And I couldn't dash. His sobs were back in full force at this point, racking his throat and burning away his reason. He didn't bother suppressing them this time, openly welcoming his mother's hands as they wiped away the tears on his cheeks. The thing beneath his skin was itching and boiling, even though the self-hatred that had been burning brightly earlier was lessened. She hummed gently as they rocked back and forth on the couch. Time was slipping past Izuku uncomfortably, so he didn't spare a worried glance at the clock during their long embrace. Soon, Mom pulled back and revealed her red-cheeked face to him. Their tears had finally dried up. We could both use some water, couldn't we? But she still sniffled wetly. She mussed his hair gently before patting his head. I understand most of what happened with the sludge villain and such, but, honey, you saved Katsuki. All Might wasn't right about Dash. I know, Mom. He stammered around the pent-up emotion in his chest. He came back and told me he changed his mind. He said I could be a hero. Her responding smile was bright with hope and joy and so many other emotions. She hugged him tightly, and he hugged her back. He quickly explained the incident before he stepped in with Kaken, dismissing his mother's incessant worried rambling all the while. When he was finally done explaining the whole story through once more, they were both slumped tiredly into the couch. It's been such a long day. Inko was the first to get up, offering to heat up leftovers and put on a pot of tea for dinner. He happily agreed, and only obliged when she told him to go get changed due to his sheer discomfort and exhaustion. You can eat dinner, and then rest, and then. He carefully made his way into the hallway to his room, grabbing the backpack strewn across the floor gingerly. As he made his way near the bed, he set the pack there. Deliberately, he pulled the folded piece of paper out of the front pocket. He held the paper tightly, thumbing the corner, until he set it down on the shelf near his desk. His chest was feather-light, and the corners of his mouth perked up unconsciously. And then, you can get better. Ijiro's hands were carefully wrapped around his phone. Aizu had said he was going to message the group chat back earlier, but it's already like, what, 8 o'clock? He should have messaged back, right? Ijiro wasn't the socially nervous type. He never had been. Really. He was told he was good with people, and tried to take that to heart. But Aizu was different. He didn't like going into his issues. He was more closed off about his problems than any of their other online friends. But Ijiro could tell something had been wrong for a long while. They'd been friends for a little over 2 years now, and Aizu would still disappear with seemingly no explanation, and he always sounded guilty about it. Ijiro really wasn't one to push, though. He actually encouraged Aizu and everyone else in their chat to take as much time as they needed for real-life stuff. Ijiro wasn't going to blame them for getting busy, especially considering he'd been doubly so for the past few months thanks to school. And besides that, Aizu tended to wind up in crazy situations as is. Aijiru didn't blame him for needing time to comprehend whatever freak accident had popped up that week. Still, though, he's worried. Aizu had disappeared for almost 2 whole days earlier that week, and he was scared something had happened. When he had come back and said he was just trying to catch up on sleep, Aijiru knew something was up. But he didn't dig into it. If Aizu wanted to keep it to himself, Aijiru wasn't going to keep that from happening. Still, though, he hates being lied to, even if it's for posterity's sake. He lets out a deep groan of frustration before abandoning the rose gold phone he had been clutching desperately on the side table so as to not accidentally crack it with his quirk. Getting worried and worked up isn't going to help, idiot. Just give him the time. A low rumble from his right sent Aijiru sprawling, and he quickly made a mad dive for the phone. On the screen were several incoming notifications from their group chat. Aizu's on. Oh, thank God. He quickly made his way to the app and waited with bated breath at the conversation now unfolding. Today, 7:57 p.m. Might Light. Hey guys. Sorry I haven't been on all day. Today, 7:57 p.m. Acid Queen. He leaves. Today, 7:58 p.m. Might Light. Pink my God. Today, 7:58 p.m. Acid Queen. I thought you fucking died, dude. Good to see you alive and kicking. What's up, though? Today, 7:58 p.m. God, that's edgy. Oh, hey, Aizu, you're not dead. Good to see you, dude. Today, 7:59 p.m. Might Light. Fof Kadio, you guys have no faith in me? Today, 7:59 p.m. God, that's edgy. Okay then, maybe you can restore my faith. Why were you AFK all day? Today, 7:59 p.m. Might Light. I got stuck in a villain attack. Today, 7:58 p.m. Acid Queen. Holy shit, IZU, what the fuck? Today, 7:59 p.m. God, that's edgy, told you. But seriously, are you okay, IZU? Might Light, God, that's edgy, and Acid Queen are typing. Aijiru was now gaping down at his phone. Oh my God, he was in a villain attack? Holy shit, I hope he's okay. He quickly started typing, and the other is typing. Messages blinked away one by one. It was nice of them to give him time to talk, especially considering he was desperately trying to not accidentally activate his quirk and rip his phone screen to shreds. Today, 8:02 p.m. Soft Boy. Okay, first off, hi. Second off, IZU, what the hell, how do you wind up in these situations, and are you okay? Dear God, you're giving me gray hairs. Please be safe, and also how? Today, 8:03 p.m. Might Light. God, Kishi, I'm so sorry, dude. Don't worry, guys, I'm alright. There were pro heroes there and everything. I didn't do much, but I got caught up in the middle of it. Today, 8:03 p.m. God, that's edgy. Did you jump into the middle of it in order to save someone? Today, 8:03 p.m. Might Light. God dang it. Aijiru snickered. Right on the money as usual, comma. He carefully read over Aizu's explanation of everything, not wanting to overcrowd him during one of the rare occasions he actually wanted to talk about something like this. God, I can't believe he actually jumped in to save that asshole from his class, though. That's Aizu for you, I guess. Slowly, the chat started to wind down. Kama got after Aizu for getting injured, to which Aizu sent a blurry photo of himself giving a thumbs up with a bandaged hand. Ashido, meanwhile, offered her usual color commentary. Aijiru simply made sure Aizu knew he was there if he needed someone to talk to. Today, 8:09 p.m. Might Light. I think I'm okay. Don't worry too much, alright, Kishi? None of you should freak out about this. And besides, I got to meet All Might, so I'm doing pretty good right now, all things considered. Today, 8:10 p.m. Might Light. Oh, also, I know it's getting late, so whenever you see this at Lizard Friend Likes Baths, I'm okay, Naga DWILY, and I hope you are good. I hope everyone can sleep well tonight. Oof, I am gonna pass TF out now, love. Aijiru snickered once more. God, what a dork. Then, his eyes fluttering ever so slightly, he bid everyone good night and turned off his phone once more. They're gonna be fine. He's gonna be fine. He shut his eyes and felt the beckoning, warm embrace of sleep. It's gonna be fine. Hang on, Aizu. Dagoba Beach was, dare Izuku say, the most disgusting place he has ever been. As if the heaps of trash and debris weren't enough, There was a rotted-out cove of abandoned fish carcasses and bird nests just nearby. He had refused to go too close due to the dirty, skin-crawling feeling he got every time he saw it. Well, that was until today. Just stepping onto the damp staircase leading to the sand was enough to send his nerves running. Deep under the sticky anxiety rising in his chest, he felt his quirk burn with discomfort. Dagoba Beach was to be Izuku's training ground. He had to build muscle with something. And, in all honesty, it was his thorough research and Mom's insistence that led Izuku to accept this spot as his new makeshift gym. Hauling different shapes and sizes of objects would be best to make his muscles healthy and useful, and the trash lot seemed to have plenty of that. In addition, Inko said that offering to clean up the beach is exactly what a hero would do, and he couldn't back down from her encouraging smile. Yesterday was spent contacting local officials and asking about the beach. Ever since the outbreak of forest fires within the past decade, it took a lot for Izuku to swallow down the crushing guilt at that statement. A new committee dedicated to protecting the prefecture's wildlife had been formed. They were more than glad to allow him to take care of for some community service hours. So now, here he is, standing in front of mounds of trash in the rattiest pair of sweatpants he owns. A pair of new working gloves are tucked into the pockets, alongside several medical masks, ones which match the one already plastered over his face. Well, now or never, I guess. Izuku took a deep breath, slipped on the gloves, then got to work. New messages December 23rd. Today 4:45 a.m. Lizard friend likes baths. At everyone good morning kings, queens, and others. Happy Christmas Eve. Today 4:47 a.m. Acid Queen. Nagahan I love you, but why the fuck are you up at ass o'clock in the morning? Today 4:47 a.m. Lizard friend likes baths. Obcaf good morning to you too Pink. And I couldn't really sleep, so here we are Ax Fax Facile. Today 4:47 a.m. Lizard friend likes baths. Oh also, I wanted to ask y'all something. Today 4:48 a.m. Might Light. Naga, I think you're the only person in the entirety of Japan who cares this much about Christmas. Today 4:47 a.m. Lizard friend likes baths. Aw not you too Izu. Carrot. Today 4:48 a.m. Might Light. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love Christmas, but I don't think it warrants a countdown calendar ask Fox. Today 4:48 a.m. Lizard friend likes baths. Well, I mean my family celebrates it like crazy. My mom lived in America for a few years, and she told me they celebrate it for like a whole month over there. That's why she loves it so much. Today 4:49 a.m. Soft Boy. Oh damn, that's rad Naga. Today 4:49 a.m. Lizard friend likes baths. Kishiai. GM dude. Today 4:49 a.m. Soft Boy. Asked Casf. Love. Today 4:49 a.m. Might Light. Hi Kishi. Also, what did you want to ask Naga? Today 4:50 a.m. Lizard friend likes baths. OH right. I know that we still have a few months till finals, but I wanted to ask you guys if you know what school you want to go to. I'm pretty much clueless off gaff. I have no idea where I want to go. Today 4:50 a.m. God, that's edgy. Good morning, bastards. Nice to see you on Naga. Today 4:50 a.m. Soft Boy. Safsifsvafkafkas. Today 4:50 a.m. Acid Queen. Abjkabjkaljak. Today 4:50 a.m. Might Light. Aspkasfksafksulfk. Today 4:50 a.m. Lizard friend likes baths. Sabkavskasp. Today 4:50 a.m. God, that's edgy. Don't key smash at me you gay cowards. Today 4:51 a.m. God, that's edgy okay, but for real good morning I hope you guys are good, and I'm not really sure where I want to go yet tbh. Today 4:51 a.m. Lizard friend likes baths. Sapphic rip same hat. Today 4:51 a.m. Acid Queen. I'm trying for you babby. Today 4:51 a.m. Soft Boy. Same W her carrot. Today 4:51 a.m. Lizard friend likes baths. Oh my god, that's so cool guys. Today 4:52 a.m. Lizard friend likes baths. WBY Izu. Today 4:52 a.m. Might Light. I think I'm trying for you too. Today 4:52 a.m. Acid Queen. Oh my god really? Today 4:52 a.m. Soft Boy. Holy shit, IZU, that's amazing. You'd kick ass in the hero course. Today 4:52 a.m. might light. Oh god, you guys are too nice, Hascast, but seriously, yeah. The whole incident a few weeks back really inspired me to follow that dream, so that's why I've been doing all the training stuff. Today 4:52 a.m. soft boy. Oh my god, that's so awesome, dude. No wonder you've been gone so much, cask sack. Today 4:52 a.m. might light. Sapch Bask, I'm still sorry for that, but thanks, dude. I'm gonna try my hardest. Happy face. Today 4:53 a.m. lizard friend likes bats. Oh my god, IZU, that's rad. And guys, I just had a crazy idea. Today 4:53 a.m. soft boy. Eyes emoji. Today 4:53 a.m. lizard friend likes bats. What if we all tried for UA? Today 4:53 a.m. God, that's edgy, holy shit. Today 4:53 a.m. soft boy. Oh my god, that be so rad, dudes. Today 4:53 a.m. acid queen. I am fucking Ian. Today 4:52 a.m. might light. Oh my god. I mean, comma, would you even want to go? Today 4:53 a.m. God, that's edgy. I mean, I've always wanted to be a hero, but my quirk is super intimidating. I didn't think it'd be suited. But today 4:53 a.m. might light. Oh god, no, I could write a 10-page essay on why your quirk would be perfect in hostage, rescue, and villain fighting missions. Your quirk is amazing, dude. But I mean, I understand if you're not down with going. Today 4:54 a.m. God, that's edgy. Actually, I think this is just what I needed. I've been debating for a long while. Fuck it, I've got good enough grades. Let's try for UA. Today 4:54 a.m. lizard friend likes bats. Oh my god, yes, 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 holy crap. I am gonna go talk to my moms about this triplet. ILY guys, thank you. Love, love, love. Today 4:54 a.m. God, that's edgy. I'm gonna go talk to my parents too. See you later, guys. Love. Today 4:53 a.m. might light. Alright. TTYL everyone. Have a good Christmas Eve Naga. Carrot. Love. Everything hurts. Izuku had been working on the beach for a few weeks now. Inko was more than happy to accommodate to his busier and more gruesome schedule, making and sticking to a meal plan, buying him training equipment when needed, and offering to help him relax and do cool-down stretches on his off days. Thank the gods for Mom's medical knowledge. However, even with Mom's careful guidance and watchful eye, Izuku still somehow managed to hurt himself. Over and over and over. First it was a pulled leg muscle, then it was rope burns along his arms from trying to haul a fridge across the sand. Then he nearly broke his foot when he got startled while carrying a microwave. So today was a day off. He really needed one. All things considered, the end of the year was fast approaching, so he had plenty of studying to do. But that didn't stop his muscles from straining against the idea of staying still. Exercise gave him something to do. It gave him something to strive for. All the while, it was also bettering him so that he could follow his dreams. Taking time and avoiding doing work seemed like the inverse of what he should be doing. That is, until he caught Inko's fretting eyes watching as he silently went through his warm-up routine. She was probably worried sick, and he honest to goodness couldn't blame her for being so. Taking a deep sigh, he bounced up onto the balls of his feet and made his way to the kitchen, pouring a glass of water. Mom sat there, cooking an extra pot of rice for lunch tomorrow, and her eyes darted back and forth between the stove and his carefully blank face. Isa dash. Mom, I'm okay, honest. He interrupted, setting the glass down and smiling at her warmly. His adrenaline from the stretches was finally fizzing out, and Inko smiled back as he slumped onto the counter. I promise, I'll go straight to bed early tonight, all right? Dash, his face poked out from behind the crossed sleeves of his hoodie. In a quieter voice, he uttered, Dash, sorry for worrying you. Despite everything, he truly does think she understands. Planting a kiss to his cheek and sending him off to shower and rest, he was reminded of that. A week passed by, and soon another and another. It had been almost 2 months since Izuku started this training regimen, and he was already feeling a difference. He felt refreshed after running instead of drained, and was able to lift the smaller trash with almost no trouble. He was still going a bit off schedule, taking time off from rest days to lift weights and do core exercises passively, but he was getting better, so to him, it didn't matter. His morning run became something to look forwards to, and he relished in the little amounts of muscle definition on his arms and legs. He wasn't seeking to bulk up, but knowing that all of this was making a difference really helped. He was now almost officially into his last year of middle school, too, which further fueled his training. He had ended last semester with top-notch grades, as usual, but he couldn't afford to slack off now. He took time to study to his heart's content. The UA entrance exam isn't just about the physical test. I've got to stay on top of school, too. But, as the days passed by, so too was he reminded of the next step of this whole plan. Quirk training. Izuku understood that he probably shouldn't have been nervous. It was just another part of the process. Control was another thing he needed to improve. People with dangerous quirks have to go through intense training to control them all the time, right? I shouldn't have to be any different. But I am. My quirk is different. It's not an explosion quirk, or an enhancement quirk, or a dangerous emitter type. It's... Thinking about the nature of Hellfire made Izuku shudder. It was still well into January, so he hoped any passers-by would blame his nervous quivering on the cold. He steadily approached the steps to Dagoba Beach. It was an hour after school got out, but there was almost no one in view. Though the slow restoration of the shoreline made Izuku's smile brighter every visit, he wasn't afraid to admit that he would miss the solitude the beach provided. As soon as it was restored, it had probably become a big tourist attraction again. Not now. Quit with the thinking. Just get started, get into the rhythm. He jumped into the fray, picking up bottles and cans into a large handful and depositing them into one of the bags he had brought. Thankfully, the Wildlife Protection Committee had finally dropped off the collection of dumpsters they had promised to provide, so it was just a short walk to where the trash could be collected. He slowly made his way up in the trash's size, carefully balancing a stack of empty boxes atop a microwave about 10 minutes in. The next hour and a half drifted by like this, Izuku hauling as much trash as his arms could carry to the dumpsters and back again. He only stopped once the 3 receptacles were nearly filled to the top, in which he decided to let it lie until trash day tomorrow. Slowly, his thoughts of training were replaced by what tomorrow would bring. I have a book report due, and me and Mom were going to take a shopping trip, too. He didn't bother to remember quirk training, though. The idea loomed in the back of his mind, undetected. The fire beneath his skin thrummed. Chapter 5. Befriend Your Past Regrets. It's been a long time since Yagi last walked these halls. He surprisingly still has the office's layout memorized, taking each corner he needed without misstep, passing by familiar meeting rooms and waiting areas with ease. He glanced towards the staircase looming in the corner, but was drawn to the elevator instead. Damn old body would probably give out on me if I climbed 3 stories. The ride was quiet, filled only with the tinny sound of elevator music and the gentle tap-tap of his nervous foot. It really had been a long time. He's not sure if he should be excited or terrified. He settles for both. The device lets out a gentle ding before the doors part. He took a cautionate step, the reality of being invited here again suddenly seeming too good to be real. He shoved down his own fear. Come on, you're All Might. You don't have to be scared of him, before walking further down the hall. The door was almost exactly the same, too, but the nameplate was different. A simple, golden plaque replaced the one Toshi had gifted him so long ago. He felt his throat constrict. Toshinori's fist barely made contact with wood before the door was thrown open. A bubbly-looking girl in some sort of hero attire. Who designed that? Her organs aren't even protected. I'll have to advise him on getting her costume changed. Popped into the doorway, before reeling back when almost knocking into him. Oh gosh, I'm so sorry. I didn't even hear you knock dash. She turned around, a bright smile plastered on her face, and called, Sir, I think your next appointment is here. After that, she ushered Toshinori inside with a thumbs up and trotted out of the doorway once more. He couldn't have hired someone more different from himself, I suppose. Toshinori turned around and walked through a short hallway before stepping through the open door at the end. The layout of this room was one of the only ones that had changed. There are more pictures of himself. Well, his hero form, up on the walls, and the desk is larger and darker than before. There aren't any plants anymore, the room mostly being capitalized by shelves and shelves of thick, heavy-bound books. The person behind the desk was the most different, though. Toshi almost choked on his own blood at the sight of him. He's wearing glasses with thicker rims, and the roots of his hair are now a pale blonde. Instead of a dark-colored blazer like Toshinori had been expecting, he's wearing a deep gray suit. His face looks even more gaunt than last time. "Hello, Night Eye." He didn't immediately rise to meet him, taking his time and looking up from the paperwork in front of him, until gingerly standing when Toshinori didn't move forwards. "Please take a seat, Yagi." Toshi gulped down the fear crowding his throat before carefully sitting down in the chair offered to him. They were the same from before he had left, plush and lined with polka-dotted fabric. Night-Eye stared him down from across the table. "Night-Eye, I know that we dash." "Yagi, I'm not here to fight with you anymore." He interrupted, and the scowl on his face grew softer. Toshinori let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. "I know you already looked over the files, and I know we discussed the final possible candidates, but I really do think I've found the one, Yagi." Toshinori perked his head in interest, curious as to which of the few potential successors Night Eye had chosen to take under his wing. Their discussions of his legacy had ended abruptly, but Night Eye had contacted Toshi out of the blue a few months back. And now, they're here, in the same room together for the first time in a couple of years. It was hard to parse through the group of first years last time due to them being just that, but a few had still stuck out to me. Now that they've started their second year, I have a definitive answer as to which student I think is most worthy. He continued, before sliding open a metal drawer and carefully pulling out a hefty-looking file. "I offered him an internship at my agency last year, and he gladly accepted. I've seen him grow so much, Yagi, and I truly think he would be ready to accept this responsibility as quickly as needed." A stone dropped into Toshinori's stomach at that. "Still want me to retire so soon, huh?" Night Eye slowly opened the file, before turning it around to face Toshi. The name Mirio Togata was printed at the top of the page in bold, blocky letters. Just below that, there was a portrait shot of the student. "His name is Mirio Togata, and he has what I believe to be the most potential as the next #1 hero." Night Eye finished, before sliding the file closer to Yagi. He took it in his large, skeletal hands, before startling slightly at the sound of a knock at the door. I wanted you to meet him today, what the hell? He couldn't have warned me first. It appears he's a bit early." Night Eye hollered an affirmation to come in, and the door opened to reveal the boy from the picture. Toshi quickly closed the file, and then slid it back onto Night Eye's desk. "Togata-san, it's good to see you. Thank you for coming." Night Eye Kami spoke, and the boy perked up before hurriedly making his way over to the vacant seat. He was wearing the trademark UA uniform. "Never a problem, sir. I'm glad I could meet with you too at this." He turned to Toshi and smiled brightly. "I've heard so much about you, Yagi-san." Toshi plastered on his most convincing smile, before offering a handshake to the boy, though he wasn't expecting the young man to have such a strong grip. He then nervously turned to look at Night Eye, who had a pleasant mask over his features. Yagi, this is obviously Mirio Togata. I've told him a bit about your work with All Might, and how you were interested in finding important upcoming heroes." He was setting the stage quite simply for Yagi's own acting. Thankfully, he had so kindly counted out the factor of explaining his dual identity to this student. That helped suppress the anxiety bubbling in his gut. "Oh, of course. Though, I haven't heard nearly as much about you," Toshinori added, turning and smiling gently towards Togata once more. "About that Night Eye interjected, grabbing a notebook and the abandoned folder from atop his desk with a smirk. "Shall we begin? Izuku is being followed." Or, at least that's what the hulking amount of anxiety in the back of his mind is screaming. No one hardly ever took the path he was running for his morning jog, but he kept hearing the distinct sound of footsteps coming from nearby. He would have counted it as paranoia, but he continued to catch glimpses of a figure a little distance behind him, just out of view in the nearby trees. The whole situation sent his skin and the flames beneath it, crawling, but he didn't want to be obvious. If it was actually a creep or a villain, not letting them know he was on guard would be helpful. So he kept running. He had both his earbuds out by now and was breathing deeply to help settle the pace of his heart. He had come along to a cluster of benches in a park when he decided now might be a good time to take a rest. Knowing Kimui Wood's hero agency was nearby helped settle his nerves, too. Slowly, he came to a stop and took a swig of his water bottle, leaning against one of the benches and pretending to check his phone. Over time, the sound of footsteps grew louder, and he carefully used his bangs to shroud his own watching gaze. A little ways off the path he had been taking, a person emerged from an area more shrouded by trees. He had been taking the trail along the outside of the wooded area. The thought of being a literal paranoid firebug surrounded by trees on all sides made him decide against otherwise, so the footsteps weren't actually behind him, which was good, but suddenly his head shot up. He hadn't noticed it before. The person's hair was mostly shrouded by a high ponytail, but it was definitely a familiar shade of pink. The obvious purple tone to her hands and legs made him gape further. The hero in training who had helped him during the sludge villain incident was sidling up his daily running path. I've got to be dreaming. Izuku almost didn't bother her, settling on concealing his exasperated expression in his phone and water bottle, until the woman herself let out a cry of recognition. Oh my God, what is she doing here? Wouldn't her internship have ended like months ago? Hey, is that you, little hero? He felt heat rise in his cheeks and looked up to watch her stride over happily. He couldn't believe she actually remembered him. Oh, why yeah, that's me. It's really nice to, see you again, Dakakari. He swallowed down the fear climbing his throat and shoved his, now seemingly useless, phone in his pocket. She was wearing knee-length running shorts and a baggy sweatshirt, her ponytail decorated with a cluster of hair ties with charms on them. The dark purple hide on her hands was further up her arms than before, but what Izuku was really confused about were the monster-like claws on her feet. And the fact that she wasn't wearing any shoes. That was definitely odd, too. She must have caught him staring, because she looked down at her own feet and let out a low chortle. Oh God. Yeah, I guess I was wearing my hero boots before, huh? She toyed with her bangs momentarily, before pointing to the seat across from to Izuku. Mind if I sit? He nodded slowly, and she carelessly sat down on the park bench nearest him. She took a long drink from her water bottle, Izuku toying with the strap of his own dumbly in silence, before she sat it down heavily next to her feet. So, I thought you were just here for an internship, and that would have ended months ago, right? So, he trailed off lamely, to which she gently smiled and leaned back into the bench. Yeah, but, well, why see, when I graduated, I realized this division has a serious lack of help. There's a total of, for agencies in this general area? And that's not nearly enough to handle all the problems this place gets. She took another sip of her drink. That should be obvious. What with the whole sludge villain incident? She genuinely frowned at that and turned her gaze back to him. So, yeah, I'm here to cash in on that internship with Backdraft and hopefully help out with all the shady shit that's been going on out here. But also, how are you doing? Shit, I never caught your name. It's Izuku Midoriya, don't worry about it. He gently said, before taking a long sip from his own water. She was looking at him in a subtly sad kind of way. And I'm doing pretty good. Thank you again so much for all of your help that day. She finally smiled again, softer than before. The name's Hikari Akashi, and you don't have to thank me, Midoriya. I'm glad I could help at all, honestly. She laughed heartily at that, and leaned back against the bench once more. My damn supervisors would barely let me near those fucking fires, let alone jump in and help. My quirk makes parts of my skin practically impenetrable, though, so I don't see what all the fuss is about. At that comment, Izuku perked up. He almost choked on his own spit as a billion questions raced to get out of his mouth. He wilted slightly, though. Don't be rude, you dumbass. She probably doesn't even. Hey, what's with the frowning over there? If you've got a question, spill it. She smirked, holding up her large, purple claws in a thumbs up. But they weren't purple anymore. They were starting to lighten in tone. The patchy, dark skin up near her elbows was slowly shrinking back down to her lower arms. The tips of her claws were glowing slightly, too. Um, if you, don't mind me asking, what is your quirk? Her smile didn't even waver. Not at all. Little Midoriya. My quirk's called light armor. It basically lets my body absorb whatever light levels are around me and turn them into a transformed layer over my skin. The claws on my hands and feet are because of that dash. She pointed towards the tips of her nails with her other hand. And the glowing there is 'cause I'm in the sun. I was walking through that forested area 'cause the trees there still have their leaves. They give me good cover, and my body can absorb the shadows. He was gaping in awe as she slowly pointed out glowing seams in the creases of the fading purple. Slowly, they advanced out, until more than half of her hand was coated in a faint, shimmering light. Wait, so your body just uses the wave particles that light is made of as a sort of protective layer? She nodded, and he plunged on. Then how does shadows affect that? Shadows are typically just the absence of light. Does your quirk treat it like some separate kind of wavelength? She was gaping now, staring at him with wide, wondering eyes, before scrunching up in laughter. Damn, no one's guessed that as quick as you before. But yup, my doctor called in a quirk specialist when we first found out, and they freaked when I explained that I could do my thing with shadows, too. She emphasized her words with heavy air quotes, before slouching back into her seat. Izuku was itching to pull out the mini notebook hidden away in his pocket and write all of this down. But he didn't want to be rude, and he certainly didn't want to seem like a creep to the kind woman who had literally helped save his and Kaken's lives. Before he could deliberate on it for long, though, she slowly got up and began gingerly stretching. Well, I think I ought to get back home. It's my third day in town, and I really should finish unpacking. He jumped up to meet her, and they carefully made their way to the entrance of the park. Would it be all right if my mom and I brought you a welcoming gift? He paused and felt his face heat up, not fully thinking through the words before they spilled out of his mouth. Oh God, I hope she doesn't think that's weird. What if she thinks I'm weird? God damn it, I should just. Oh my God, you're too sweet, little Midoriya. You guys don't have to do that. She smiled warmly at him, and at his relieved and hopeful expression, she sighed and fished a phone out of her pocket. Look, I'll give you my number, and you can have your mom call and talk to me, all right? If she's as generous as you, I'd love to meet her. She playfully smirked, and Izuku blushed deeply before fishing his own phone out of his pocket. He saved her contact information, and she set off, presumably towards her own home, at a jog. Izuku managed to forget he was still smiling the whole walk home. Toshinori watched Togata's retreating back exit through Naitai's office door before slumping slightly in his chair. The meeting had gone well from what he could tell. Togata was a kind, powerful boy, and Yagi could tell his desire to help people was genuine. The boy was more than happy to answer all of Toshi's questions, telling story after story about his quirk and his training and his time with Naitai, and giving off more hope than Yagi could ever dream of seeing from one kid. Despite all of that, though, Naitai was smiling gently at his desk now, hands crossed in front of him, an emptied teacup set off to the side. He turned once more to Yagi, sending him a look that reeked with a sense of, I told you so. Well, Yagi, what's your verdict? Toshinori swallowed around the lump in his throat. He's certainly more than I could have expected, Naitai. The man in front of him smiled gently, but it broke when he heard Toshi clear his throat. The room suddenly felt a lot more tense, but he needed to say this. He wouldn't keep this from him any longer. But, well, you see, he coughed into his hand softly, before averting his gaze to the floor. I found another young man who I think is worthy too. Toshinori couldn't see Naitai's expression from his view of the floor, but he could feel the surprise radiating off the man. It kind of surprised him, too, all things considered. He thought that maybe after meeting Togata, he would have been able to decide on his successor here and now. But it didn't change the spark he felt inside of Midoriya. He's not sure anything could. Is that so? Yagi finally looked up to meet his gaze, but his expression didn't clue him into anything that Night-Eye could have been feeling. He himself felt a little helpless. Yes. Well, you see, he's a middle schooler, second year I believe, and I watched him save someone when even I was almost too weak to step in. They sat there in silence for a moment. before Night Eye reached for his teacup carefully. Yagi, I understand this is your responsibility, but please, don't throw away your power on some boy you don't even dash. I'm not. I swear, Night Eye. Yagi sighed deeply before slumping further into his seat. I told him to try for UA, and I was hoping that would test his resolve a bit. If he gets in, I can keep a closer eye on him and see how he fares in his training. Night Eye's face was clouded with contemplation, though he looked less exasperated than before. I'd like to keep an eye on this boy, too. What's his name, if you don't mind my asking? Ah, Izuku Midoriya, and I met him during the sludge villain incident a few months back. Night Eye began writing something down in a small notebook. Toshinori isn't sure where he pulled it from so quickly. All right. Thank you for coming and meeting with me on such short notice, Yagi. I hope you'll continue to think about our offer, and that you'll contact me if anything changes. Yagi began to get up and retreat to the door at the back of the room, but paused when he heard the scraping of a second chair follow his own. And Toshi. Toshinori turned around, eyes wide with surprise. Thank you for trusting me with this. Toshi smiled sadly and walked out of the office door. The simple nameplate on the front of the wood shone brightly in the hallway's fluorescent lights. As soon as Izuku burst through the front door, he began rapidly explaining his accidental meetup in the park. Inko smiled brightly when he said he offered to bring Akashi-san a housewarming gift, and she jumped at the chance to whip out some baking supplies and prepare something. A little over an hour later, and they had an entire tray of steamed daifukumachi ready. As Izuku began arranging the desserts prettily in a decorated bento box, Inko was pacing around the living room and chatting kindly with Akashi over the phone. Once they both hung up, she offered Izuku a bright smile and a thumbs up, and they set out to the woman's address. She lived a short 10 minutes away, and soon they were parked and walking up the steps of her apartment complex. She was waiting for them in the complex's entrance room, calmly scrolling through her phone while perched on a dark patterned sofa. She brightened at the sight of them and walked halfway to meet them. Oh God, you guys really are too sweet, huh? She laughed heartily before taking the tray Inko was now kindly handing her. It's not a problem, dear. Izuku told me all about how you helped during the incident a while back, and I was more than happy to offer something to help you settle in. Mom smiled warmly, patting Izuku on the head for emphasis, despite the red crawling up his cheeks. Since we haven't officially met before, I should probably reintroduce myself, Inko sputtered, before offering out a hand. I'm Inko Midoriya. It's really lovely to meet you. Akashi smiled back widely, shaking Inko's hand with a strength she obviously wasn't ready for. Same here. And of course, I'm Hikari Akashi. She stopped, and Izuku could swear he saw her cheeks turn a shade of pink. Would you too, like to come up to my apartment? A cup of tea is the least I can offer for, she trailed off. She was definitely blushing. Inko readily agreed, but only doing so after asking if they were imposing numerous times. Akashi insisted they weren't, all the way until they were unlocking her third-floor apartment and stepping inside. They could see the golden-pink hues of the setting sun through a large window near a lounge area, which illuminated the entire apartment with only the help of a small lamp in the corner. Akashi hurried inside after slipping off her shoes, shifting around still unpacked boxes before turning and pointing over her shoulder. I'm, gonna go start the tea, if that's all right. Inko and Izuku gave the affirmative as they carefully towed off their own footwear. They slowly made their way into the apartment, but not too far before Akashi called from the kitchen. You can take a seat at the counter, if you'd like. Sorry about the boxes on the couch. That's quite all right, hun. Don't worry about it. Inko smiled gently before cozying into her seat at the counter. Izuku followed, awkwardly hefting himself onto the seat and forcing his legs to not swing. Akashi-san, sorry if I'm intruding, but are you unpacking all of this by yourself? Akashi looked up from where she was pouring tea before sending a stilted smile Inko's way. Oh, yeah. I was offered to stay here when I went looking for a job at Backdraft's agency. I don't really know anyone around here other than a few of the other members of their team, and I didn't want to bother them on a work day, she trailed off, before going back to pouring the tea. I don't mind it, though. It's easy enough since I don't have all that much more to unpack, I've just been a little swamped with all the paperwork is all. She carefully balanced the tray in one hand and set it on the counter Inko and Izuku were sitting at. The other two grabbed their cups with a thank you before she nabbed her own. Well, it's still a big responsibility, Akashi-san. I understand if it takes you some time to settle in. If you'd like, me and Izuku could come by when you decide to finish unpacking and lend a hand. I remember what moving to a new apartment alone is like. It's a lot more work than you might think. Akashi stopped sipping her tea, staring at Inko blankly before musing her bangs with her hand. She laughed, embarrassed. Oh God, Midoriya-san, you're really too kind. I couldn't accept that. You're probably busy anyhow, and I really don't have that much more to. She drifted off, before glancing at the stack of boxes covering part of the room from view. Okay, so I have a bit more unpacking to do, but I really couldn't accept it, Midoriya-san. I wouldn't want to impose dash. Nonsense, Inko interjected, setting down her teacup with a smile. We'd absolutely love to help, and Izuku can count it towards his training hours, anyhow. He smiled sheepishly at that comment, fumbling to set down the teacup crowding his hands. Akashi turned to him, before raising a questioning eyebrow. Oh God. Yeah, I've been doing some, endurance and muscle training for the past few months. I'm aiming to get into a hero school. To his surprise, she didn't laugh and dismiss his dreams like people usually did. Instead, her face split into a wide grin. Damn, little hero. Getting an early head start, are we? She winked at him cheekily, and he felt his entire face light up like a Christmas tree. I guess you could say that. He began to fumble with his tea once more, but stopped short when Akashi asked another question. So, any idea what school you're going to try for? The teacup didn't meet his lips. Instead, it sat an inch from his chin for a solid few seconds. He stared dead ahead, caught off guard by the woman's words. Inko turned to him expectantly, curiosity clouding her expression as well. Well, here goes nothing. I've been thinking I want to try for UA. He felt his face reflexively scrunch up and took a sip of tea to hide the reaction. His gaze was fixed on the wall opposite the two women in front of him, avoiding their expressions. Oh God, I can't believe this. I haven't even told Mom, yet what if she? Izuku, you're finally sure about UA? Inko interjected into his thoughts, and he turned back to her when he heard the pride in her voice. She was smiling widely, tears beading in the corners of her eyes. Izuku swallowed back the lump in his throat and turned to see Akashi's face plastered with a wide-eyed, slightly flabbergasted look. He nodded shakily, and his mother's arms were suddenly wrapped around him. Oh damn, that's amazing, little hero. You've got what it takes to make it at UA dash. She paused, and a smirk crossed her face. Though, as a Shiketsu alum, it's my job to tell you that that school's the greatest. He giggled restlessly, and she let out a snort-filled laugh at the sound. Inko wasn't hugging him anymore, merely holding his shaking hands in her own. They went on like that for a while, chatting about Izuku's school choice and training regimens. I could give you some tips straight from my old hero studies teachers, if you'd like. That'd be amazing, Akashi-san. All the way until the darkness outside caught Inko's attention. With a glance at the clock, they all realized it was well past time for the two Midoriyas to head home. So they gave back their emptied teacups and planned to meet up and help unpack within the next few days. Akashi gave Izuku a shiny Shiketsu sticker with a wink and a smirk before sending the two on their way. When they got back home, he put the sticker on his current hero notebook. No nightmares awoke him from sleep that night. Naomasa was tired. Actually, tired really didn't cut it at this point. He had been getting around 5 hours of sleep per night ever since the recent Mizudafu forest fire incident, and it had begun wearing him down a few weeks in. It had been almost 2 months since the investigation officially went underway, and things had barely gotten better since then. His blood was about 70% caffeine at this point, and one visit to his doctor led to a long lecture on how he needed to ditch coffee in favor of an actually stable sleeping routine. Yeah, sure. He could sleep when whatever had set half of Mizudafu ablaze, more than once, was safely locked away. So no, Naomasa was not tired. He was exhausted. It was one particularly cold night in January, and Naomasa was staying late at the station once more. The higher-ups had been hounding him for an explanation for weeks now, and he was desperately trying to find one. Just as he was about to reach for his third cup of coffee, he heard a knock at the door. A murmured call of "come in" led Officer Sansa to walk into his office, fur well-groomed and face surprisingly happy for the time of night. "Naya, good evening, Detective," he meowed, before setting a small envelope on the detective's desk. Nao Mesa sent him a confused glance, and he jumped to explain. "Ah, this is the filed form for the CCTV tapes you requested from around the time of the incidents. I have to warn you, though, there's not much left from either of the initial times. A ton of them near the forest fire were melted, and a lot of cameras had to be replaced altogether." Naya. Nao Mesa sighed deeply, before finally picking up the mug he had been reaching for and taking a long sip. He was going to need another pot of coffee if he wanted to get through the second round of tape viewing. He learned his lesson after falling asleep halfway through last time. "Detective," Sansa started, but Nao Mesa put up a hand to stop him. "Thank you, Sansa, for the evidence and the concern, but I promise I'll be fine." He stood up and stretched, popping his shoulder and back loudly. "I'm going to go cash in this form for the tapes tonight. Hopefully these prove to be more useful than the Northern Side tapes were." His nose wrinkled in disgust. Those tapes proved nearly pointless, only capturing evidence of the fire spreading and not where it actually started. What a waste of a week. He grabbed the folder on his way out, allowing Sansa to close the door behind the two of them before sending one last tired smile the officer's way. Long, careful strides brought him to the Evidence and Recording Center, where he was handed a large box filled with the tapes he had requested. Once he had a careful grip on the box, "No, Officer Kobayashi, I don't need any help. Thank you, though. And be sure to tend to the office plants when you get the chance, please." He slowly made his way back to his office, where he turned the large TV in the corner of the room to face towards his desk once more. "All right, better get started." The night went by like that for a while, him watching an hour or two of grainy, poorly positioned security footage from one street or another before switching to the next tape on the pile. It was around 2:30 a.m. when something strange happened, though. He had gotten through nearly half the box of tapes by now, the small piles of ones that included footage from the fire stacked neatly on his desk, while the others were thrown onto the floor haphazardly. Finally, though, he caught a glimpse of something as he fast-forwarded to get to the proper time on the tape. He quickly slammed the rewind button, leaning forwards in his seat to get a better look. Barely in the corner of the screen, almost fully concealed simply due to the angle of the camera, a figure could be seen walking. He paused the video momentarily and turned up the brightness on the TV to maximum. It was Hammerhead. It had to be. Their blocky figure and large, cleaver-like knife matched his silhouette. Sukachi wrote down the time on the tape and scrambled towards the box once more. God damn it, where's the tape for the next street over? He finally found it, ripping off the plastic sleeve and shoving it into the player in the other tape's stead. It began to wind up slowly, and as soon as the footage flashed on screen, Nao Mesa typed in the correct time on the play menu. The player whirred and fast-forwarded for a few moments, before pausing to display the same time as the other tape. He pressed play and watched in desperation as nothing happened on screen, until Hammerhead was nowhere to be seen, where Nao Mesa thought he would be. Instead, there was the blonde-haired boy. He walked towards the other half of the screen, before stopping and double-taking at something just out of view. Then, a large, meaty hand wrapped itself around his arm and forced him off-screen, too. Nao Mesa waited with bated breath to see any sign of another figure. No one appeared, though, and he quickly shoved the other tape back into the player. He went back to the time from before, but this time, he waited. He waited and watched. A silhouette marred with a head of spiky, curly hair came into view in the corner. That's. Just as soon as Midoriya came into view, he shot forwards into that same out-of-view area. His backpack was thrown aggressively to the ground, still in frame. Finally, Nao Mesa watched for a few more long, drawn-out minutes. Nothing but shadows and an engulfing light came into frame. He shoved the other tape back into the player and waited once more. A few minutes after the initial meeting, someone stepped out from the alleyway. They looked, well, Nao Mesa couldn't really tell. They were mostly engulfed in flames, face obscured and stance shaky. They didn't look in pain, but it did appear like simply moving around was a struggle. They were dragging something large and equally on fire behind them. He sat there, breath held, and waited for them to come fully into view. They never did, though, simply walking along the sidewalk just parallel to the camera before disappearing beneath the frame. A small trail of fire blinked into and out of life in their wake, and several long minutes later, police cars and ambulances pulled up to the scene. There was blood at the corner of the screen, scorched and caked into the concrete, from what he could see, but he obviously couldn't tell whose it was. That couldn't have been Hammerhead, could it? We never did find where he went, and there's been no official documentation on what his quirk is. Maybe he was resistant to Midoriya's flames, and that's why Midoriya woke up across town. But why would he? He stopped, breath catching in his throat. His eyes were blown wide, but they weren't seeing the rest of the rescue scene devolving on the screen. Naomasa got up and searched through some of the files located messily on his desk. Once he found the right stack, he parsed through, until he slammed open the folder, breathing stilted and quiet, hands unsteady. He searched for a recently read article in his phone's browser, then read what he was looking for once, then twice. He read the entire paragraph a third time for posterity's sake. Shakily, he navigated to his contacts and pressed on the one at the top of the list. It was always at the top of the list. A few gentle rings, and the person on the other end was finally picking up. Sakachi, is everything all right? It's the middle of the night dash. Toshinori, were you there in time during the sludge villain incident to see Midoriya Izuku use his quirk? He already knew the answer. It was right there in the article he had just reread. Toshinori coughed lightly on the other line, obviously startled. Naomasa didn't have the headspace to think to apologize. Yes, why? Naomasa took a brief pause, tracing his eyes back over Izuku Midoriya's file once more. I need you to tell me everything you can about what you saw that day. Please. Chapter 6, Hopes for You. The days seemed to slip by far too quickly. Izuku and Inko were busy helping Akashi unpack on Sunday, and they decided to work on his training schedule later that week. Soon after that, though, everything kind of blurred together. Monday was back to school, but the comforting weight of his plans with Akashi made it more bearable. Then Tuesday came around, and Akashi came over for training, but was greeted to tea and pastries for the first hour of their visit. After they had been thoroughly relaxed, a simple look-over of all of Izuku's training plans was how the afternoon went by. Wednesday was about the same, with final tweaks to the new regimen wrapping up his and Akashi's scheduling time. They decided to try and implement the schedule at the end of next week. Thursday was uneventful, with Akashi starting her new position at Backdraft's agency and not actually having time to help Izuku train. Friday and Saturday passed by quickly, the only noticeable thing being everyone in their group chat sharing their new training plans. Then another week passed by. Akashi came over several times, but it was mostly filled with quiet chatter about her new work. Things at Backdraft's agency were far too busy for them to start training yet, so they elected to reconvene next week. And pretty soon it was Sunday morning once more. Akashi had said she would be busy with more work-related paperwork, so she elected to not visit until their promised time at the end of the week. Izuku decided to just sit tight. That is, until he began reading over their training schedule once more, and something hot and acidic slunk into a spot in his mind. Quirk training. A big, empty area of the regimen was left to fill out with all of his quirk training details. They hadn't discussed it. Akashi seemed to recognize his discomfort with the subject somewhat, because she skipped over the portion of the paper before claiming that they could fix that later. Though it felt like a hole opened up in the bottom of his stomach at the thought, and his palms shook wildly. Deep down, he felt some sort of resolve. He had time to gain some semblance of control over Hellfire. And although the idea of Akashi being close enough to witness his quirk made the bubbling stress rise into his throat, he had to admit that the idea of not doing it alone was welcoming. He couldn't hurt her, though, couldn't lose control. He had to make sure of that before they started. An idea began to blossom in his anxiety-muddled brain. Stashed away amongst his collection of both empty and filled notebooks sat a small, black, pocket-sized journal. He hadn't used it before. The leather cover felt far too intimidating for something like his hero analysis, and the size was barely big enough to allow for a legible full-body drawing. Anyhow, he carefully slid the pocketbook from the shelf and set it down on top of the training regimen. On the inside of the front cover, in bold, blocky lettering, he wrote the notebook's new title: Hellfire, Self-Analysis. Dagoba Beach was steadily on its path to recovery. The shoreline was about half visible now, but the garbage was piled high enough to supply the perfect amount of cover for what Izuku needed to do next. It's around 3 p.m., and the chill of late winter had long since set in for the day. The weather was exactly what he had been hoping for, just icy and wet enough to balance against his Quirk's power. Weaving around the piles of trash was second nature by now, dodging sharp pieces of metal and abandoned trash bags with ease. He finally got to the small clearing amongst the towers of garbage. He had prepared for this, even if it made his stomach threaten to upturn itself. He abandoned the backpack of supplies, filled with a small fire extinguisher, a couple of bottles of water, extra medical masks, the same kind as the one plastered over his face now, antacid tablets, and a couple rolls of bandages near the entrance of the clearing before stepping carefully into the center. You can do this. You can do this. Just. The thing beneath his skin squirmed and burned, and he swallowed the lump in his throat. Just breathe. Though his eyes were squeezed shut now, he could feel tendrils of heat weaving their way up his palms. It was hot, almost stiflingly so, but he didn't open his eyes. You can't be burned anymore. You can't be burned. Remember that. Remember that. Remember that. Remember that. Damn it. Tears were beating in the corners of his eyes, but he kept them closed tight. His fists tightened, too, until he could smell smoke and dust through the mask over his nose. His entire arm stung with something, burnt and dark and there, but also not. He choked on the stench of flames, breath stuck in his throat, and oh God, I can't breathe, I can't breathe, I can't. And suddenly, his palms were open to the air once more. The fire and smoke dissipated. He could feel the heat wrench from his hands in one last resounding burst. His knees were planted in the cold sand. Numbed arms snaked around his torso, and he held himself momentarily. He cursed under his breath. How was he supposed to use his quirk like this? He couldn't stand to even feel the heat of it against his skin, let alone control and see it. Minutes trudged by. Eventually, he got up from the sand, hands shaking violently but no longer warm, and he pointed his palms outwards, away from his face. He swallowed down another fragile breath. His eyes were open now. Come on, you can do this. Just fucking do it. Carefully, he felt the heat from his veins travel and center itself in his palms. It burned there strongly, but he didn't falter. His throat constricted, but he forced a shaky breath through his lungs. Slowly, the heat was held there, until it traveled outwards, reaching into each of his fingers. It pulsated, strong and burning, but not as bad as before. Holding it was harder. All his concentration was focused on the squirming power in his hands, ebbing and flowing and constricting, but God, not too tight. Until suddenly, he took a deep breath and forced it out even further. Teeth gritted and fingers clenched. He watched with teary eyes as a faint glow escaped from the skin of his hands. It was beautiful. Izuku is ashamed to admit that, but it truly looked that way. The skin there was shimmering, and the color of the light was constantly changing from orange to red to a golden yellow color. The heat wasn't burning anymore. Now it was just warm. Izuku's skin itched, but it was barely bearable. His stance was shaky, his hands even more so, but he was doing it. He was using it, and he wasn't out of control. Emotions he couldn't quite understand flooded his system, and the fire in his blood boiled over once more. The glow in his palms was safely and suddenly cut off, and he let out several heavy, ragged breaths. The heat slunk back up his body, and a warm, euphoric sense bubbled in his chest. A broken smile crossed his face. He could do this. He was doing this. All right, once more from the top. Izuku went home later that evening with ashen palms and a medical mask caked to his sweat-stained face. Mom was more than worried when he walked in, but elected to give him some space to himself. He really appreciated that, considering his mind was still reeling. Everything hurt all over, and not the usual kind of strain he felt after a workout, but a phantom, weighty, charred kind of pain. It was like his skin was paper that had been drenched in water but still managed to catch on fire. Like he was weightless only because the edges of himself were fading and floating. Like his body was made of smoke. He carefully parsed through the fridge in search of something to eat, settling on leftover cold soba, before sitting down and staring blankly at the bowl. An aggressive growl was let out from his stomach, and he felt a burning sensation in his throat at the thought of eating. Slowly, he brought the chopsticks up to his mouth in small, infrequent intervals. An hour went by until he finally finished the bowl. He took a cold shower after that, scrubbing at the soot caked between his fingernails for minutes on end. Even after none of it was visible, he could still feel it there. Everything was slow but blurred. He got out of the shower without remembering doing so. The tiny, leather-bound notebook was sitting on his desk, and he scribbled down a few notes before changing into pajamas and crawling into bed. He laid there for a long while, itchy and restless, and with his fingers feeling the ghost of the tingling heat that had been there before. Something cold slipped its way down his face, and he startled at the fact that yes, he was actually crying. Stupid. This is stupid. It went fine. Nothing even happened. You're fine. A stifled breath forced its way out of his throat. The flames seared. Then why the hell? Do I feel like I'm dying? The tears came twofold. Everything was burning. There were buildings on fire all around him. The ones closest were new to him, tall and dark with slender windows and smoke-filled rooms. The ones furthest away were familiar. They were short and squat, maybe about 2 stories tall, with burnt trees just at the visible edges behind them. They were crumbling. Then it was black. Something cold and slick started filling the blank space where his feet should have been. He couldn't see it, just feel it, as it slowly climbed up to his calves, then his knees, then his thighs, then to his belly button. His palms became submerged soon after, and they were searing. It reached his chest, then his neck, then his mouth. He was drowning in it, he supposed, but he couldn't feel the pain over the red-hot agony slipping through his body elsewhere. And then it was gone. It snapped back to the hell's cape of flame and smoke. Then back to black. Repeat. That next morning was oddly quiet. Izuku ate breakfast in silence, then bid his mother goodbye and began the walk to school. Everyone was busily talking in the group chat, but he just muted it. His fingers felt too stiff to type. The mornings were finally warm enough for him to leave his scarf and gloves at home, so he did so. It didn't stop the overbearing heat in his fingers, though. And soon, he was sitting in class. First period went by with almost no interruptions, Kaken only bothering to send him angry, biting glares instead of actually provoking anything. Internally, Izuku was thankful. He wasn't sure if he could handle Kaken's quirk today, even if he wanted to. Second period went by, then third, then fourth. Lunch came and went. Izuku barely took a bite of the bento his mom had packed and elected to save it for later. Then, it was fifth period. And, finally, sixth period. His fingers stiffly followed along with the teacher's lecture, though he blinked and forgot what he was writing several times. Come on, it's last period. Just 20 more minutes. 10 more minutes. 5. He absently fiddled with the pencil bag sitting near his arm, and subsequently jolted when the bell rang loudly throughout the classroom. He carefully packed his bag with rigid fingers, before slowly standing and making his way to the door. Deku was acting weird. Katsuki hated that he knew that, but he did. And he hated the idea that stupid fucking useless Deku was hiding something more than he hated wanting to know. I'll just ask him. The bastard can't say no. He's too much of a coward for that. The day went by, until it was last period, and Katsuki could see Deku's dumb, far-off look from his seat. His palms ignited just looking at him, just wondering whatever stupid secret he was hiding. The final bell rang, and Katsuki made sure to pack up his stuff as quickly as possible. Deku looked too spaced out to even notice anyone there, which was about right, considering he didn't bother rushing for the door as soon as they were the only two left. He's not even scared. He's fucking looking down on me, isn't he? He's an idiot if he thinks just because he's fucking off to train, or whatever the hell, that he's suddenly better than me. Katsuki squared his shoulders before taking several large, bold steps forwards. Now he's going to get answers. That is, until an all-too-familiar sensation of heat prickled at the corner of Izuku's senses. His own flames writhed beneath his skin. No, 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 please not today. Please just… Deku, what the fuck is your problem? Please just let me go. Izuku swallowed tightly, not bothering to turn around, before murmuring, "And nothing Kakin, sorry if I…" A dash, he didn't bother finishing the sentence before walking forwards. A hand clamped down aggressively around his shoulder, and he froze solid. You don't think I'm that fucking stupid, do you? What's wrong with you, asshole? Bakugu's hands were heating up at a steady pace, and Izuku's knees began to shake. Please not now, not today, please I can't. Well, you just gonna stand there, you useless piece of shit? Izuku couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't even breathe. His back lit up in pain as Bakugu's elbow stabbed into its center. Izuku was stiffly bent forwards now, hands shakily grasping his stomach. Bakuga stepped on his foot aggressively, before once more putting his hand on his shoulder. You're so fucking pathetic, you know that? The boy took a step back before slowly exiting through the door. Next time, answer me, Deku. Whatever bullshit you're trying, it isn't gonna work. I'm always gonna be better than you. He slammed close the door behind himself, and Izuku clamped his hands over his ears. Every part of his body was screaming out in pain, either from the fire beneath his skin or the bruised feeling now blossoming on his back and toes. His knees collided with the floor, and he simply held himself there. I probably deserve that. No tears came forth from his eyes. He got up and started moving. Izuku came home a little later than usual. Inko really didn't mind. He had seemed distant last night and that morning. She couldn't blame him for needing some space. Her subtle fears blossomed into nightmares, though, when she heard him enter, inhale sharply, and then choke on a sob. Izuku, baby, is that you? Is everything dash? She came into view of the hallway, and as soon as she did, she caught the way the door to Izuku's room snapped closed suddenly. She heard the lock click. Izuku. Izuku, honey, are you alright? Please let me in, Izuku dash. He sobbed quietly behind the door, attempting to choke out a reply several times. Inko couldn't decipher what any of it meant, though. His voice was too congested with tears to make any sense. She sat there, ear pressed against the door and tears budding her eyes, for several long minutes. His breathing became less ragged as time went on, but he still sounded pained. It was silent for a while, before the door lock clicked back out of place. She heard him shuffle around behind the door, before slipping it open and letting it go wide enough for her to see. Oh no, oh Izuku. He looked awful. His hair was in tangled knots on top of his head, and his cheeks were a deep, irritated shade of pink. The shoulders of his school uniform were shredded and charred, and he was shaking all over. She stood there for several long, drawn-out moments, before stepping forwards and embracing him. He sank into the touch, and in this moment he seemed so small. Izuku, are you alright? Baby, who did this to you? He hiccuped into her shoulder for a moment, and she let him stutter around the tears still blocking his throat. I don't want him to get in trouble. I'm okay, Mom. Are really dash. She pushed him back slightly to take in his broken, shaken form once more. Anger burned its way to the front of her mind. Izuku, who did this? I'm not going to take no for an answer here. You don't deserve to be treated like dash. And Mom, it's fine, I'm dash. Izuku, you are not fine. His eyes blew wide at that, and the tears from before slowly drizzled back. She wilted under his expression, her own volume taking herself by surprise. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to yell. But, honey dash, she felt tears burn on her cheeks, too. She didn't bother wiping them away. You don't deserve this, okay? You have to know that. And whoever did this deserves to know that, too. He shrunk in on himself, before nodding silently. Now, baby, who did this? A pause. It was Kakin. And wait. Katsuki? Katsuki did this to you? Why, honey? I thought you guys were still friends. Izuku wilted further, before wiping at his eyes aggressively. And no, not really. I think he actually, he let out a pained, sharp giggle. I think he actually kinda hates me. Oh baby, has this happened before? Inko sucked in a breath between clenched teeth at the small nod that followed. How could she be so stupid? Izuku had been hurting. Katsuki had been hurting him. For how long? Without her even noticing? Her heart clenched too hard for her to cry anymore. Mom, I'm sorry I didn't tell you about Keikaken earlier, but dash. Izuku, she interrupted, firm but understanding. Why do you still call him that? He startled and stood there stiffly. If he's treating you like this, I don't know if he deserves that. The confused, concerned look that met her eyes pained her heart more. But slowly, he began to nod. The tears in his eyes were replaced with something else. Something more calm, more strong. She held him once more, before double-checking that he'd be okay. I'm fine, Mom, really. I can't even be burned anymore, remember? And walking out of the room. Her hands subconsciously clasped the collar area above her heart. Time to make a few phone calls, I suppose. Inko tried to get Izuku to stay home on Tuesday, but he wouldn't budge. Yesterday had been hell, sure, but he wasn't about to miss class because of a hiccup like that. That's what he told himself over and over again, even as he shakily packed his bag for class. He carefully read over the messages Kishi and everyone else in chat had sent his way last night. God, I really don't deserve them. Again and again, and his nerves settled a little more each time. The walk to school was quick, his headphones playing calming music all the while until his feet met the locker area. He toed off his shoes and into his slippers before heading to class. He was early, just by a few minutes or so, but thankfully early enough to avoid the crowds that would inevitably rush through as soon as the bell rang. He unpacked his things and waited with bated breath until the other students arrived. But as everyone filtered in, one figure was startlingly missing. Bakugo was marked as absent. Some part of Izuku was grateful, his system flooding with a sense of ease just at the thought of not having to deal with the boy's quirk today. But the other half of him was terrified. As it turns out, Bakugo had missed classes today to have a meeting with the principal. Inko and Mitsuki were present for that meeting, Inko electing to leave Izuku to his classes despite the principal's efforts. The meeting was quick and to the point. Mitsuki had been one of Inko's longtime best friends until a few years ago. Drifting apart didn't change the fact that she trusted Inko's judgment, though. Inko wasn't sure if that was a compliment, but she was glad for it, for now. They addressed Katsuki's problems, left him with 2 weeks' worth of suspension, and the meeting came to a close. He was silent as soon as they stepped inside, as soon as he saw the pain on Inko's face. He went home silent, too. Inko swears she could see his shoulders shaking. The week went by strangely quickly. Izuku's heart was heavy all the while. He couldn't bring himself to practice with Hellfire more, instead electing to go running 2 times a day instead of 1. He was far too tired to do anything but sleep once he was back home. He hadn't had another nightmare since Monday, either. His legs hurt and his chest felt tight, but he actually managed to get some rest. He kept running. The empty seat, where Bakugo normally sat, set his nerves on edge. He kept running. Mom kept sending him worried glances when he came home to eat dinner. He kept running. He was fine. He would be fine. He kept telling himself that as his feet pounded on the concrete, as the sweat rolled down his face and his palms tightened. When he came home to eat dinner Friday night, he surprisingly heard someone chatting quietly with Mom. That sounds like. Akashi-san was perched on the couch. The tips of her fingers, which were wrapped tightly around a mug of tea, were shifting between purple to gold, and she had a sad sort of smile on her face. Inko perked up at the sight of Izuku, and Akashi followed her gaze. Ah, hey there, little hero. You, a dash, she gave him a once-over, before the smile on her face faltered slightly. You doing all right? Izuku worriedly toyed with his hair, before settling his hands in his pockets and stepping forwards. Fine, Akashi-san. How about yourself? Inko frowned momentarily, and Akashi set down the mug she had been clasping. Izuku walked into the kitchen, grabbing a water bottle from the fridge before opening it gingerly. When he turned back around, their eyes were still on him. What's up? Kid, you look like shit. Izuku sputtered around the water in his mouth, and Inko choked on her own spit. She didn't actually interject, though. It suddenly became startlingly clear to Izuku that he hadn't actually looked in the mirror in a while. Oh, I probably do. Izuku, baby. Inko wringed her hands in her lap anxiously. I've been talking with Akashi-san a bit, and we think dash. I think it's best if we postpone your training. Izuku's eyes blew wide, and he carefully reminded himself not to drop the water bottle he was now clutching desperately. Inko scrambled to explain. We just dash. We're worried, Izuku. You haven't been talking to me, and you just look. She paused and floundered for the right word. Lost. Both of them turned to Akashi, and she sighed deeply. A claw raked its way through her bangs. Midoriya-kun, your mom told me about what happened, and I think she's right. You're bottling stuff up. She frowned deeply, before leaning backwards into the couch. Izuku took a step forwards. He stuttered, trying to find some sort of defense. There really wasn't one. Not a viable one, anyhow. Izuku dash. Inko stood up and reached towards him. Her hands felt cold against his burning skin. Please, baby. This isn't just about what happened with Katsuki, is it? He inhaled sharply and took a half-step backwards. They didn't say anything for a long while. Akashi's hands were stiffly in fists, and Izuku's shook as they did the same. You're right. I'm so sorry. He choked on a dry sob, and Mom wrapped her arms around him. When they parted, he followed her back to the seat across from where she had been previously sitting. She took back her place, closer to Akashi. I tried Quirk training, and it didn't go as well as I wanted dash. He saw Inko stiffen and Akashi release a held breath out of the corner of his vision. I mean, it shouldn't be a big deal. It went okay, but I haven't used it like that in so long. And it just... He glanced up at the two women in front of him. Both of their faces were painted with worry, but they were also understanding. It scared me. Midoriya-kun. Akashi spoke so suddenly that it sent Izuku flinching. I'm not going to dig into your business. Your mom has told me a bit about this dash. Inko stared down anxiously at her wringing hands. But I don't know the whole story, and I don't have to. She got up and slowly walked around the table at the center of the room, before crouching lowly to meet Izuku's gaze head-on. I want to help you, Midoriya. Quirks are dangerous at times. Hell, I made a lot of mistakes back when mine first manifested, but that doesn't change the fact that I want to help you, okay? He felt tears slide down his cheeks, but he didn't bother to wipe them away. Akashi was smiling softly, and he felt his face mimic it. He nodded. Okay, now, if you're ready, we can start training at the beginning of next week, all right? He nodded again, and her smile grew wider. Things started to wind down after that, Izuku sending an understanding look Inko's way, and Akashi offering to help her clean up the dishes from their tea. Izuku floated around nearby, nibbling on leftover Gyudon his mother offered him while the two women spoke lightheartedly. When Akashi grabbed her bag off of the counter and made to leave, she threw a final wink over her shoulder. Now, little hero, you better take a damn break this weekend, all right? No more training until Monday. He bowed several times, mumbling affirmations all the while. She left the apartment laughing. He went to bed that night with the ghost of a smile on his face. For the first time that week, he felt okay. It wasn't nearly as cold out tonight. Considering it was almost February, this was probably normal, but she still longed to feel the calming lull that the nighttime breeze brought. She made her way into the entrance of the apartment complex and up the elevator. The tinny music playing soothed her nerves, and she relaxed into the thin sweatshirt hung over her shoulders. The elevator stopped, and she went down the hall and unlocked the door to her apartment. She turned on the lights and toed off her shoes before walking stiffly inside. It was dark, the only light in the entire apartment coming from the lamp in the corner. She set down her bag on the couch with a thump. She stopped. One hand was splayed across the plush back of the couch. The other hung loosely at her side. They both tightened into fists. Midoriya. Hikari wasn't a sentimental person, or at least, she told herself she wasn't. Deciding to move to a new city after witnessing how terribly it was doing could be seen as sentimental, but she wouldn't call it that. It made sense to her. It didn't feel like she had much holding her back, anyhow. She slowly moved forwards, into the kitchen and around the polished, wooden floors. The talons on the ends of her toes were purple and sharp, but she did her best not to scrape the floorboards. A few minutes later, and she had 2 small bowls of rice prepared. One was stuck back into the fridge for tomorrow, but she carried the other into the small offshoot of the hallway nearest her bedroom. It was a cozy corner. She had hardly been able to fit in the wooden cabinet now nestled there. On top of the cabinet was an empty pot for incense, a framed photo, and a cloth mat. She placed the bowl on the mat and bowed her head in silence for a brief moment. When she moved back into the cozy living room, something heavy weighed down in her heart. She remembers the broken look on Midoriya Inko's face, the way her eyes watered and her shoulders shook when she explained her son's fight at school, the way she continuously apologized for being a bother, when all she was really doing was expressing the fear that Hikari could feel coming off of her in waves. She remembers the look on Midoriya-kun's face, too, the way his gaze was unsteady and his eyes unfocused, the way he choked on tears at the mere mention of there being something wrong. She remembers the way him and his mother explained his fear of his quirk. Something about it all reminded her of herself. She loosely flopped onto the couch, turning on the TV at the front of the room absent-mindedly. She wasn't paying attention, though her mind was somewhere else completely. Deep down, she hoped beyond hope that she could help them. They had managed to capture her heart in a few short weeks, after all. Hikari wouldn't call herself a sentimental person, but she had never been the best judge of character, had she?